Tonight, we delve into the chilling side of the wilderness. We bring you true stories, experiences shared by those who ventured into the Michigan backcountry, seeking adventure, and stumbled upon something far more sinister. These aren't campfire tales whispered among friends. These are first-hand accounts of encounters that defy explanation, moments where the line between the natural world and something unknown, blurred with terrifying consequences. Get ready to question what lurks in the shadows of the Michigan wilderness. Get ready to hear why, for some, true camping and hiking in Michigan was a deadly mistake. Prepare to be disturbed. The stories begin now. They call me Owen. I've always been drawn to the quiet corners of the world, the places where the hum of civilization fades into the rustling of leaves and the murmur of running water. That's probably why I ended up living in northern Michigan, a stone's throw away from the Huron, Manistee National Forests. Weekends for me often involve lacing up my hiking boots or, when the weather's right, strapping my kayak to the roof of my old Subaru and heading out to explore the waterways that crisscross this beautiful, rugged landscape. The Osable River had been on my list for a while. I'd heard whispers from other outdoor enthusiasts about its stunning beauty, the way it meanders through dense forests, offering glimpses of wildlife and a sense of profound isolation. So, last Saturday, with a forecast promising clear skies and mild temperatures, I decided to finally make the trip. I packed my usual gear, a dry bag with extra clothes, a first aid kit, plenty of water and snacks, and my trusty paddle. I even threw in my small portable speaker, thinking some ambient music might enhance the experience. Looking back, that feels almost comical. The drive to the put and point was scenic in itself. The roads wound through thick woods, the sunlight filtering through the canopy in dappled patterns. As I got closer to the river, the air grew cooler and carried the earthy scent of pine and damp soil. I found the designated launch area without any trouble, a small gravel clearing with a few other cars parked haphazardly. A couple was just finishing unloading their canoe, their laughter echoing through the otherwise silent woods. I nodded a greeting as I wrestled my kayak off the roof, the familiar weight settling comfortably in my hands. The initial stretch of the river was exactly as I had hoped. The water was remarkably clear, allowing me to see the smooth, moss-covered stones on the riverbed. Towering pines lined the banks, their reflections creating an almost mirror, like image on the still surface. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of the water against my kayak and the occasional call of a bird hidden deep within the trees. It was peaceful, serene, the kind of quiet that soothes the soul and washes away the stresses of everyday life. For the first hour or so, I simply paddled along, letting the current guide me. I took my time, pausing occasionally to admire a particularly striking view or to take a sip of water. I even pulled out my phone to snap a few pictures, trying to capture the breathtaking beauty of the surroundings. The air was crisp and clean, and the sun, though high in the sky, was filtered by the leaves, casting a soft, golden light on the water. As I ventured further downstream, the river narrowed in places, and the trees grew closer to the banks, creating a tunnel of green. The sunlight became more fragmented, and shadows danced on the water's surface. It was still beautiful, but I started to notice a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The sounds of nature seemed to diminish, replaced by an almost unnerving silence. The birdsong became less frequent, and even the gentle rustling of leaves seemed to fade away. It was the stillness of the water that really started to get to me. While the river was flowing, there were sections, particularly in the wider parts, where the surface became uncannily smooth and still. It was like looking at a sheet of polished glass, reflecting the trees and the sky with perfect clarity. But there was something about this stillness that felt unnatural, almost expectant. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just the effect of being alone in the wilderness, my senses heightened by the solitude. I even put on some music through my portable speaker, hoping to break the silence and ease my growing unease. But even the calming melodies seemed to get swallowed by the surrounding stillness, doing little to dispel the creeping sense of disquiet. Then, as I rounded a bend in the river, I saw it. The water in this section was particularly wide and still, reflecting the dense canopy above like a dark mirror. It was in the center of this glassy expanse that I noticed something different. At first, I thought it was just a dark patch on the river, but perhaps a collection of fallen leaves or a shadow cast by a submerged log. But as I paddled closer, my heart began to pound in my chest. It was a face. looking up at me from beneath the surface of the water. It was pale, almost translucent, and the features were disturbingly clear. I could make out the contours of a forehead, the bridge of a nose, the faint curve of lips. The eyes were open, wide and unblinking, staring directly up at me. They were dark, impossibly dark, and seemed to hold an expression that I couldn't quite decipher, but it sent a shiver of pure terror down my spine. It wasn't moving, just staring. There was no body attached that I could see, just the face suspended in the still water, looking up with those vacant, unsettling eyes. It was as if someone or something was lying just beneath the surface, perfectly still, watching me from the depths. My breath caught in my throat. My mind struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. Was it a trick of the light? A hallucination brought on by the isolation? But the image was so vivid, so undeniably real. The details were too clear, the stare too intense. A primal fear gripped me, the kind that bypasses logic and reason. Every instinct screamed at me to get away, to put as much distance as possible between myself and that horrifying visage in the water. Without thinking, I dug my paddle into the water, the sudden movement breaking the eerie stillness. The kayak lurched forward, and I paddled with a frantic energy I didn't know I possessed. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The image of that face, those dark, staring eyes, was burned into my retinas. The rhythmic splash of my paddle against the water was the only sound I could hear over the pounding of my own heart. I kept my eyes fixed on the river ahead, scanning the banks for any sign of civilization, any indication that I was not alone in this increasingly menacing wilderness. The unsettling stillness of the water seemed to follow me, even as I paddled with desperate speed. I could feel the weight of that unseen gaze on my back, the chilling sensation that I was being watched from below. My imagination ran wild, conjuring up all sorts of gruesome possibilities. What was it? Who was it? How long had it been there? The beautiful scenery that had so captivated me just an hour ago now seemed sinister, the towering trees like silent witnesses to some unspeakable horror. The gentle murmur of the river had transformed into a menacing whisper, carrying secrets I didn't want to know. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw a flash of color through the trees, the bright orange of a life vest. A moment later, I spotted a small wooden dock jutting out into the river. Relief washed over me in a dizzying wave. It was a small, private dock, but it was a sign of human presence, a beacon of hope in this growing nightmare. I steered my kayak towards the dock, my hands trembling as I reached out to grab hold of the weathered wood. I pulled myself and the kayak onto the shore, my legs feeling weak and shaky. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath, my eyes darting nervously towards the river. The water near the dock seemed normal, the surface rippling gently in the breeze. But I knew what lay beneath, what I had seen with my own eyes. I quickly unloaded my gear, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. I didn't want to stay here any longer than necessary. The thought of having to paddle back upstream, past that place, filled me with dread. As I was loading my kayak back onto the roof of my car, a man emerged from a small cabin nestled amongst the trees. He was an older gentleman with a weathered face and kind eyes. "Everything all right there, son?" he asked, his voice calm and reassuring. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. Could I tell him what I had seen? Would he think I was crazy? Yeah, just a little spooked. I managed to say, trying to sound nonchalant. "Beautiful river, though." He chuckled softly. "It is that. Been living here for 30 years, and I still find new things to admire." I forced a smile, eager to leave. "Well, I should probably get going. Long drive back. You take care now," he said, waving as I got into my car. I started the engine, my hands still shaking slightly. As I pulled away, I glanced back at the river one last time. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the water. It looked peaceful, serene, utterly normal, but I knew the truth. I knew what lurked beneath that placid surface. And I knew that I would never look at the Osable River the same way again. The unsettling stillness of the water, and the face staring up at me from the depths, would forever be etched into my memory, a chilling reminder of the hidden horrors that can lie just beneath the surface of the world we think we know. The drive home was a blur, my mind racing. Replaying the image of that face over and over again, I kept looking in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see it somehow following me, a pale, spectral visage in the darkness. That night, sleep offered no escape. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, the face in the water, the dark, unblinking eyes. It was there in the darkness behind my eyelids, a silent, malevolent presence. I woke up several times in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the lingering feeling of dread clinging to me like a shroud. The next day, I tried to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe it was a log that just happened to look like a face. Maybe it was some kind of unusual rock formation. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The features were too distinct, the stare too real. I even considered calling the local authorities, telling them what I had witnessed. But what would I say? Excuse me, I was kayaking on the river and I saw a face looking up at me from underwater. They would probably think I was a lunatic. And what if they went to investigate and found nothing? I would just look even more foolish. So, I kept it to myself, a dark secret that gnawed at me from the inside. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen something truly terrifying, something that defied explanation. And the worst part was the unsettling stillness of the water, the way it had seemed to hold its breath, waiting for me to see. It was a reminder that even in the most beautiful and tranquil places, there can be hidden depths, and sometimes those depths contain things that are best left undisturbed. The days that followed my kayaking trip were a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. The image of the face in the water was constantly replaying in my mind, a macabre loop that refused to stop. I found myself staring into any body of water I encountered, puddles, ponds, even my own bathtub, half expecting to see those dark, unblinking eyes staring back at me. I tried to distract myself. I went back to work, throwing myself into my tasks with a manic energy. I met up with friends, forcing smiles and engaging in conversations while my mind was miles away, trapped in the stillness of the Au Sable River. But no matter what I did, the memory of that face lingered, a cold, unwelcome guest in the back of my mind. One evening I was scrolling through Reddit, trying to find something to take my mind off things, when I stumbled upon the R's No Sleep subreddit. I'd lurked there occasionally in the past, enjoying the fictional horror stories, but tonight something compelled me to read more intently. I found myself drawn to stories about strange encounters in the woods, unexplained phenomena, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. As I read through the various tales of terror, a chilling realization began to dawn on me. My experience on the river, while seemingly unbelievable, wasn't entirely unique. There were other stories, albeit fictional, that touched upon similar themes: the unsettling stillness of nature, the feeling of a hidden presence, the terrifying glimpse of something that shouldn't be. This realization, while not exactly comforting, did provide a strange sort of validation. Maybe I wasn't crazy. Maybe there really was something strange about that river, something beyond the realm of normal explanation. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that what I had seen wasn't a figment of my imagination. The clarity of the features, the intensity of the stare, it had been too real. But what was it? A drowned body. That was the most logical explanation. Yet something about the way the face had looked, the almost ethereal pallor, the lack of any visible body, just didn't fit. Could it have been some kind of animal? A large fish with strangely human-like features. The thought was absurd, yet my mind grasped at any rational explanation, no matter how far-fetched. Then there were the more unsettling possibilities, the ones that whispered in the dark corners of my mind. Was it something supernatural? A spirit, perhaps, trapped beneath the surface of the water? The idea sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine. I wasn't a particularly superstitious person, but the sheer unnaturalness of what I had witnessed made me question everything I thought I knew about the world. Days turned into weeks, and while the initial shock began to fade, the unease remained. I found myself avoiding any mention of kayaking or rivers. The thought of returning to the Au Sable filled me with a visceral dread that I couldn't shake. One weekend, my friend Sarah called, inviting me on a hiking trip to the Manistee National Forest. I hesitated, the thought of being back in the woods, near any body of water, making me uneasy. But Sarah was persistent, and I knew that isolating myself wasn't healthy. "Come on, Owen," she said, her voice cheerful. "It'll be good for you. Fresh air, beautiful scenery. We'll stick to the trails away from the river if you want." Reluctantly, I agreed. The thought of spending time with a friend and getting out of the house was appealing, even if it meant facing my fears, at least indirectly. The hike itself was pleasant enough. The trails were well maintained, and the forest was beautiful in its late summer glory. The air was filled with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating a mosaic of light and shadow on the forest floor. We hiked for several hours, chatting and laughing, and for a while I managed to forget about the face in the river. But then, as we rounded a bend in the trail, we came to a small, clear stream. It wasn't the Au Sable, but the sight of the flowing water sent a familiar shiver of unease down my spine. Sarah noticed my discomfort. "You okay?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "Yeah, just remembering something," I said, forcing a weak smile. We stopped for a moment to admire the stream, the water gurgling over smooth stones. I couldn't help but peer into its depths, half expecting to see something staring back at me. Thankfully, there was nothing but clear water and the occasional darting fish. As we continued our hike, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It wasn't a visual thing, more of a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, a sense that there was something unseen observing us from the depths of the forest. I kept glancing around, scanning the trees and the undergrowth, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. I tried to tell myself it was just my nerves, the lingering effects of my experience on the river. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger as the afternoon wore on. By the time we started heading back to the car, I was on edge, my senses heightened, every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig sending a jolt of anxiety through me. That night, back in the safety of my own home, I found myself unable to relax. The feeling of being watched had followed me back from the woods. I kept checking the windows, making sure the doors were locked, even though I knew it was irrational. As I lay in bed, trying to fall asleep, I heard a faint scratching sound coming from outside my window. My heart leaped into my throat. I held my breath, listening intently. The scratching came again, followed by a soft tapping. Fear gripped me. My mind raced, conjuring up images of shadowy figures lurking outside my house. I slowly reached for the lamp on my nightstand. My hand trembling, I flicked it on, the sudden burst of light making me flinch. I cautiously got out of bed and crept towards the window, peering through the blinds. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, I noticed it. A branch from the old oak tree in my yard was swaying in the breeze, its twigs gently tapping against the glass. Relief washed over me, so intense it almost made me weak. It was just a tree branch. My imagination had gotten the better of me. I went back to bed, but the incident had shaken me. I knew that the fear was still there, lurking just beneath the surface, ready to be triggered by the slightest thing. A few days later, I was talking to my neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had lived in the area for decades. I hesitated, but then decided to ask her if she knew anything about the Au Sable River, if there were any local legends or strange stories associated with it. Mrs. Henderson listened patiently as I recounted my experience, carefully omitting the more unbelievable details, focusing on the unsettling stillness of the water and the general sense of unease I had felt. When I finished, she looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "The Sable," she said slowly, her voice taking on a slightly different tone. "It's a beautiful river, but it has its secrets. There have been things that have happened there over the years. Accidents, disappearances." She paused, her gaze distant. "Some folks say the river has a memory, that it holds on to things that have been lost, things that should stay lost." She didn't elaborate, but her words sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't a confirmation of what I had seen, but it hinted at a deeper history, a sense that the river was more than just a natural waterway. Over the next few weeks, I found myself researching the history of the Au Sable River. I scoured local libraries and online archives, looking for any mention of strange occurrences or unexplained events. I found stories of logging accidents, of people who had drowned in the river, and even a few old newspaper articles about unsolved disappearances near its banks. None of it directly explained what I had seen, but it added to the growing sense that the river held a dark and mysterious past. The unsettling stillness I had felt, the feeling of being watched, maybe it wasn't just my imagination. Maybe there was something more to it, something ancient and unknowable. I tried to move on with my life, to put the experience behind me. But the memory of the face in the water remained, a constant, unsettling presence. It was a reminder that the world is not always as it seems, that there are hidden depths and unseen watchers, and that sometimes the most beautiful places can hold the darkest secrets. And every time I saw a still body of water, the fear, cold and sharp, would return, and I would see those dark, unblinking eyes staring up at me from the stillness beneath. The nightmares, though less frequent, still came, always the same: the silent face, the unnerving stillness, and the overwhelming sense of dread. I knew, deep down, that I would never truly forget what I had seen on the Au Sable River. It had changed me, leaving me with a lingering unease and a profound distrust of the quiet beauty of the deep woods. Years have passed since my kayaking trip on the Osable River, but the memory of that face remains as vivid and unsettling as the day I saw it. Time has dulled the sharp edges of the immediate fear, but the underlying unease, the sense that something fundamental shifted within me that day persists. I've tried to move on. I still enjoy the outdoors, the quiet solitude of the woods and the beauty of nature. But I can no longer look at a body of water, especially still water, without a flicker of apprehension. Lakes, ponds, even large puddles, they all carry a faint echo of that terrifying stillness, that feeling of something unseen lurking beneath the surface. I've never returned to the Osable River. The thought of it sends a shiver down my spine, a primal aversion that I can't quite explain. It's not just the memory of the face, it's the overall atmosphere of that day, the unnerving silence, the feeling of being watched by something ancient and unknowable. Sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet and the world outside is still, I find myself wondering about what I saw. Was it truly a supernatural encounter? A glimpse into a realm beyond our understanding? Or was there a more mundane yet equally disturbing explanation? The possibility of it being a drowned body still lingers in the back of my mind. Perhaps someone had fallen into the river, their body submerged in the murky depths, only their face visible through a fleeting moment of clarity in the water. But if that were the case, why hadn't I seen a body? Why was the face so pale, so translucent, and why that unsettling, vacant stare? I've searched online for any news reports of drownings or missing persons in the Osable River around the time of my trip. I've found a few old articles about accidents, but nothing that seemed to match what I had witnessed. It's as if the face I saw belonged to someone lost to the river long ago, or perhaps to something that was never truly human to begin with. I've also considered the possibility of a hallucination, a trick of the light, and my own heightened senses playing on my mind. But the memory feels too real, too visceral to be dismissed as mere imagination. I remember the details so clearly, the curve of the lips, the darkness of the eyes, the way the light seemed to pass through the skin. Over the years, I've shared my story with a few close friends, always prefacing it with a disclaimer about how crazy it sounds. Some have been sympathetic, offering words of comfort and suggesting rational explanations. Others have been more skeptical, gently implying that it might have been a bad dream or an overactive imagination. I understand their skepticism. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I probably wouldn't believe it either. But the experience was real for me, and it has left an indelible mark on my psyche. The nightmares, thankfully, have become less frequent. They used to plague my sleep, the silent face appearing in the darkness behind my eyelids, its stare unwavering and accusatory. Now, they come only occasionally, usually during times of stress or when I've been thinking about the river. But even when I'm not actively dreaming about it, the image is always there, lurking in the shadows of my mind, a constant reminder of the unsettling encounter. It's like a splinter that I can't quite remove, a persistent source of discomfort and unease. Sometimes when I'm hiking near a lake or a stream, I catch myself scanning the water's surface, a subconscious search for that pale, staring face. It's a reflex now, an ingrained habit born out of fear and a lingering sense of dread. I've learned to live with it, this shadow that the Osable River cast over my life. I've learned to compartmentalize the experience, to push it to the back of my mind when I need to focus on other things. But it's always there, waiting, a silent sentinel guarding a terrifying secret. I often wonder if anyone else has seen what I saw. Are there other people who have encountered that face in the stillness of the Osable? Are there other stories, whispered in hushed tones around campfires, about the things that lurk beneath the surface of that seemingly serene river? I've never sought out those stories, afraid of what I might find. Part of me wants to know, to find some confirmation that I'm not alone in my experience. But another part of me is terrified of the answer, afraid of uncovering a truth that might be even more horrifying than what I already know. So, I continue to live my life, enjoying the beauty of the natural world while always keeping a watchful eye on the water, the unsettling stillness of a lake on a windless day, the dark depths of a forest pond. They all hold a potential for something unseen, something unknown, and every now and then, when the light catches the water just right, or when the silence of the woods becomes too profound, I see it again just for a fleeting moment, a pale face beneath the surface. its dark eyes staring up, a silent reminder of the true scary camping and hiking bad decisions that sometimes lead us to the edge of the unknown, leaving us with stories that we can only share in the hushed corners of the internet, hoping that someone somewhere might understand the lingering shadow that follows us long after we've left the deep woods behind. They call me Owen, and I went kayaking on the Osable River. I saw a face that day, a face I will never forget, and sometimes I still wonder if it's still down there, waiting for someone else to see. My name is Sophia, and I've always been drawn to the wild. There's a certain magic in the untouched corners of the world, a feeling of stepping back in time to a place where nature reigns supreme. My friends, Liam and Chloe, share this passion, though perhaps not always to the same reckless degree as me. Liam is the cautious one, always double, checking maps and packing extra supplies. Chloe is the enthusiastic adventurer, ready to tackle any challenge with a grin. Together, we make a pretty good team, balancing each other's tendencies. Last summer, our adventurous spirit led us to Tahquamenon Falls State Park in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. The photos we'd seen online were breathtaking. The powerful, root beer colored upper falls and the cascading lower falls promised a truly spectacular experience. We spent the first day sticking to the well-marked trails, marveling at the natural beauty around us. The sheer volume of water thundering over the upper falls was awe-inspiring, and the gentle stroll along the river to the lower falls was equally enchanting. We took the obligatory tourist photos, breathed in the fresh, pine-scented air, and generally had a fantastic time. But as the day wore on, a seed of curiosity began to sprout in my mind. I'd read a few obscure online forums and hiking blogs mentioning a rumored hidden waterfall somewhere within the park boundaries. These whispers spoke of a smaller, more secluded cascade, tucked away from the main trails and known only to a few locals and seasoned hikers. The descriptions were vague, often contradictory, but they painted a picture of an untouched paradise, a secret gem waiting to be discovered. That evening, as we sat around our crackling campfire, roasting marshmallows and recounting the day's adventures, I brought up the subject of the hidden waterfall. Liam, predictably, was skeptical. "Sophia, you know how these things go," he said, poking at the fire with a stick. "It's probably just a myth, or if it does exist, it's likely on private property or in a dangerous area." Chloe, ever the optimist, was more intrigued. "Oh, come on, Liam! Where's your sense of adventure? Imagine finding a secret waterfall! It would be amazing!" I chimed in, showing them some of the forum posts I'd saved on my phone. "See, people have mentioned it. Some even claim to have found it, though the directions are always a bit vague." Liam sighed, running a hand through his already messy hair. Vague is an understatement. One guy said to follow a deer trail past the Big Oak, which could be anywhere in this massive park. Another mentioned 3 oddly shaped rocks near a tributary. It's like they're intentionally trying to make it impossible to find. "Exactly," I exclaimed. "That's what makes it so exciting! It's a challenge and adventure!" Don't you want to see something truly unique? Something that most people who visit this park never get to experience? After a bit more persuasion, and perhaps swayed by Chloe's enthusiastic support, Liam reluctantly agreed. We decided that the next morning, we would dedicate a few hours to trying to find this elusive waterfall. We knew it was a long shot, but the allure of the unknown was too strong to resist. The next morning, fueled by strong coffee and a sense of anticipation, we set out. We consulted the official park map, trying to identify any areas that seemed less traveled, any hints of smaller streams or tributaries that might lead to a hidden waterfall. We decided to focus on a section of the park that wasn't crisscrossed with marked trails, a wilder, more rugged area to the west of the lower falls. We started by following a less maintained path that branched off from one of the main hiking trails. It was overgrown in places, with tall ferns and thick underbrush encroaching on either side. We had to watch our footing carefully as the terrain became uneven, with exposed roots and loose rocks scattered along the way. As we ventured deeper into the woods, the familiar sounds of the park began to fade. The cheerful chatter of other hikers disappeared, replaced by the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze and the distant calls of birds. A sense of isolation settled around us, a feeling that we were truly on our own. Liam, ever the pragmatist, kept checking his GPS and the compass on his phone. "Are you sure we're even heading in the right direction?" he asked, pushing aside a low, hanging branch. "I think so," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. According to one of the forum posts, the waterfall is supposed to be near a smaller creek that feeds into the Taquamanon River. I think we're getting closer to one. Sure enough, after another half hour of hiking, we began to hear the faint sound of running water. Our pace quickened with excitement. We pushed through a thicket of bushes and emerged into a small clearing. Before us, a narrow stream tumbled over moss-covered rocks, its water crystal clear and sparkling in the dappled sunlight. "This has to be it," Chloe whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. We followed the stream upstream, carefully navigating the slippery rocks along its banks. The sound of the water grew louder, and the air became cooler and more humid. Finally, after rounding a bend, we saw it. It wasn't as large or as powerful as the main falls, but it possessed a unique charm all its own. A delicate curtain of water cascaded down a rocky cliff face into a small, tranquil pool below. The surrounding area was lush with ferns and wildflowers, creating a secluded and picturesque scene. We had found it the hidden waterfall. A wave of triumph washed over us. We had successfully ventured off the beaten path and discovered a secret beauty within the park. We spent a good hour there, taking photos, marveling at the serenity of the place, and congratulating ourselves on our adventurous spirit. As the sun began to climb higher in the sky, we knew we should probably start heading back. We had told ourselves we would only spend a few hours searching, and we didn't want to get too far off track. We started to retrace our steps along the stream, heading back towards the point where we had first encountered it. As I was walking, my gaze drifted towards the rocky cliff face where the waterfall originated. Something caught my eye, something that didn't quite fit with the natural beauty of the scene. Carved into the dark, moss-covered rock, just to the side of the cascading water, were symbols. They weren't random scratches or natural formations. These were deliberate, intricate carvings unlike anything I had ever seen before. They looked ancient, almost primal. There were swirling patterns, geometric shapes, and strange, stylized figures that seemed vaguely human, but also distinctly other. The carvings were deep and weathered, suggesting they had been there for a very long time. I stopped dead in my tracks, pointing towards the cliff. "Guys, look at this." Liam and Chloe followed my gaze. Their initial expressions of awe at the waterfall quickly morphed into something else, a mixture of curiosity and unease. "What are they?" Chloe asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam cautiously approached the cliff, running his fingers lightly over one of the carvings. "I have no idea. I've never seen anything like this in any of the park's information or displays." The symbols were unsettling. They seemed to emanate a strange energy, a sense of something old and unknown. As I stared at them, a shiver ran down my spine, and a knot of unease began to form in my stomach. We spent several minutes examining the carvings, trying to decipher their meaning. We took photos from different angles, hoping to research them later. But the more we looked, the more uncomfortable we became. There was something about the symbols, something in their intricate design, and their weathered appearance that felt wrong. The air around us seemed to grow heavier, the sunlight less bright, the tranquil sounds of the waterfall, and the stream no longer seemed peaceful but rather muted, as if the natural world itself was holding its breath. A sudden, overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. It was a feeling so intense and so visceral that it made my heart pound in my chest. It felt like we had stumbled into a place we weren't meant to be, a place that held secrets best left undisturbed. I looked at Liam and Chloe. Their faces reflected the same apprehension I was feeling. The excitement of discovering the hidden waterfall had completely vanished, replaced by a growing sense of foreboding. "We should go," I said, my voice trembling slightly. Liam nodded in agreement. "Yeah, I think you're right. Let's get out of here." Chloe, though visibly shaken, managed a weak smile. "Agreed. This place is starting to give me the creeps." Without another word, we turned and began to make our way back down the stream, our earlier enthusiasm replaced by a desperate urge to leave this hidden, unsettling place behind. The strange carvings on the rocks and the overwhelming sense of dread they had evoked lingered in our minds, a dark cloud hanging over the beauty we had initially found. We had found the hidden waterfall, but it seemed we had also found something else entirely, something far more sinister and unknown. The walk back felt different. The woods, which had earlier seemed inviting and full of life, now felt oppressive and silent. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot, made us jump. We kept looking over our shoulders, half expecting to see something we didn't know what following us. The images of the strange carvings were burned into my mind. The swirling lines, the sharp angles, the unsettlingly human, yet not figures. They seemed to pulse in my memory, radiating a cold, ancient energy. We didn't speak much, each of us lost in our own thoughts, grappling with the unsettling discovery. Liam, usually the most vocal, was uncharacteristically quiet, his brow furrowed in concentration. Chloe kept glancing nervously at the surrounding trees, her usual bubbly demeanor replaced by a palpable tension. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had intruded on something sacred, something that was not meant for our eyes. As we neared the point where the small stream met the wider Taquamenon River, we noticed something odd. The water in the smaller stream, which had been so clear and sparkling earlier, now had a murky, almost stagnant quality. It had taken on a faint brownish tint, and there was a subtle, unpleasant odor in the air, like damp earth and something else, something vaguely metallic. "Did you guys notice that?" Chloe asked, wrinkling her nose. "The water doesn't look the same." Liam knelt down, examining the stream more closely. "You're right, it was crystal clear before. What do you think happened?" I didn't have an answer. The change in the water only added to my growing unease. It felt like the place itself was reacting to our presence, subtly shifting and changing in a way that felt unnatural. We reached the main trail and breathed a collective sigh of relief. The familiar, well-trodden path felt like a lifeline back to normalcy. We started walking at a brisk pace, eager to put as much distance as possible between ourselves and the hidden waterfall. But even on the main trail, the feeling of being watched persisted. Every shadow seemed to lengthen and twist into strange shapes, and the sounds of the forest seemed amplified, taking on a more sinister tone. The cheerful calls of birds we had heard earlier were gone, replaced by an unsettling silence punctuated by the occasional, harsh call of a crow. After about an hour of walking, we decided to take a break. We found a small clearing just off the trail and slumped down onto a fallen log, our legs aching and our nerves frayed. "Okay," Liam said, breaking the silence. "What do you guys think those carvings were?" Chloe shivered, pulling her light jacket tighter around herself despite the warm summer air. "I have no idea. They looked old. Really old. And kind of creepy." I nodded in agreement. Yeah, creepy is definitely the word. They didn't look like any Native American art I've ever seen, and they certainly weren't the work of some modern, day graffiti artist. Maybe they were just some weird geological formations. Liam suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. "No way," I replied firmly. They were definitely carved. You could see the tool marks, the deliberate lines and curves. We sat in silence for a few moments, each of us lost in our own thoughts about the strange discovery. The more we pondered it, the more unsettling it became. It felt like we had stumbled upon a secret that had been hidden for centuries, perhaps even millennia. As we were about to get up and continue our hike, I noticed something else. On the ground near the base of the fallen log, half hidden beneath a layer of pine needles, was a small object. I reached out and picked it up. It was a smooth, dark stone, roughly the size of my palm. It was oval-shaped and felt strangely warm to the touch. What caught my attention were the markings etched into its surface. They were the same symbols we had seen carved into the rock face at the waterfall. My breath caught in my throat. I showed the stone to Liam and Chloe. Their eyes widened in disbelief, and a fresh wave of unease washed over us. "How did that get here?" Chloe whispered, her voice filled with apprehension. Liam cautiously took the stone from my hand, examining it closely. "I don't know. Maybe someone dropped it. Someone who made those carvings." The thought sent a shiver down my spine. The idea that someone, perhaps someone who still frequented that hidden place, had been here recently was deeply disturbing. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice urgent. Now, we didn't need any further convincing. We scrambled to our feet and practically ran back onto the trail, our earlier fatigue forgotten in the face of this new, unsettling discovery. The rest of the hike back to the main park area was a blur. We walked as fast as we could, our eyes constantly scanning the woods around us. Every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat. Every sound made us jump. We didn't stop until we reached the relative safety of the more populated areas of the park, where we could see other hikers and hear the sounds of civilization. Once we were back near the visitor center, the oppressive feeling began to lift, replaced by a lingering sense of unease and a nagging curiosity about what we had found. We knew we should probably report the carvings to the park authorities, but a part of me was hesitant. What would we even say? We went off trail and found some creepy symbols that gave us a bad feeling. It sounded ridiculous. We decided to grab some food and regroup. As we sat at a picnic table, eating our sandwiches in silence, I pulled out my phone and looked at the photos we had taken of the carvings. Zooming in on the intricate details, I felt a renewed sense of unease. The symbols seemed to wreathe and shift on the screen, their strange forms almost hypnotic. Later that evening, back at our campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had brought something back with us. It wasn't just the photos or the memory of the carvings. It was a feeling, an atmosphere, a sense of something unseen lurking just beyond the edge of our awareness. I kept thinking about the stone I had found. Liam had insisted on keeping it, saying he wanted to try and research the symbols. He had carefully wrapped it in a cloth and placed it in his backpack. I had argued that we should leave it where we found it, but he was adamant. As the night wore on, the sounds of the forest around our campsite seemed different than the night before. The usual chirping of crickets and the gentle hooting of owls were interspersed with other, less familiar sounds, soft rustling in the underbrush, the distant snap of branches, and once I thought I heard a faint, high-pitched whine that sent shivers down my spine. I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the strange carvings, the swirling patterns, and the unsettling figures. I kept imagining them appearing in the darkness around our tent. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a sudden noise. It was a sharp cracking sound, like a branch breaking nearby. I sat up in my sleeping bag, my heart pounding in my chest. I listened intently, holding my breath. Silence. After a few minutes, I started to relax, thinking it was just an animal. But then I heard it again, closer this time. A distinct snap, followed by a soft thud. I nudged Chloe, who was sleeping soundly in the adjacent sleeping bag. "Chloe, wake up. Did you hear that?" She groaned and rolled over. "Hear what?" "I think something's outside the tent." Just as I said that, we both heard it, a slow, deliberate scratching sound coming from the side of our tent. It sounded like fingernails dragging across the fabric. Chloe's eyes snapped open, wide with fear. We stared at each other in the dim light filtering through the tent, our breath catching in our throats. The scratching continued, moving slowly around the perimeter of the tent. It was methodical, almost like something was examining our shelter, trying to find a way in. Liam, who had been sleeping soundly until now, suddenly sat up, his eyes darting around in alarm. "What's going on?" he whispered. "Something's outside," I replied, my voice trembling. "I think it's scratching at the tent." We huddled together in the darkness, listening to the unsettling sounds outside. The scratching stopped for a moment, replaced by a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground. Fear gripped me, cold and paralyzing. Whatever was out there, it didn't sound like any animal I had ever heard before. And the deliberate way it was moving around our tent, the scratching, it felt intelligent, predatory. The growling faded, and the scratching started again, this time closer to the entrance of our tent. We could hear the zipper jingle slightly as whatever it was brushed against it. Panic began to set in. We were trapped inside our flimsy nylon tent, vulnerable to whatever was lurking in the darkness outside. The sense of dread that had begun at the hidden waterfall had now intensified into a terrifying reality. We had gone looking for something hidden, and it seemed that something had now found us. And I had a horrible feeling that the strange carvings we had seen were somehow connected to the terrifying presence that was now surrounding our campsite. Scratching at the tent zipper sent a jolt of pure terror through me. We were completely exposed, a thin layer of nylon, our only barrier against whatever was out there. Liam fumbled for his flashlight, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He finally managed to switch it on, and the beam danced wildly around the inside of the tent. "What do we do?" Chloe whispered, her voice choked with fear. I don't know." Liam stammered, his face pale in the flashlight's beam. "Maybe if we make some noise, it'll go away." He cleared his throat and shouted, "Leave us alone! Get out of here!" His voice sounded weak and unconvincing, even to my own ears. The scratching outside continued, unfazed. If anything, it seemed to intensify, becoming more frantic, more insistent. Suddenly, there was a loud ripping sound. The fabric of the tent near the ground tore open, and a cold gust of night air rushed in. We screamed, scrambling back against the opposite side of the tent. In the beam of Liam's flashlight, we saw it, a dark, elongated shape pressed against the tear in the fabric. We couldn't make out any distinct features, but we could see the outline of what looked like long, spindly fingers, their tips ending in sharp, black points. The scratching stopped, replaced by a low, wet sniffing sound coming from the tier. It was as if whatever it was trying to get a better sense of what was inside. Liam, his eyes wide with terror, pointed the flashlight directly at the tier. We held our breath, waiting. After a moment, the sniffing stopped and the shape moved away from the tier. We huddled together, our hearts pounding in unison. The silence outside was almost as terrifying as the earlier sounds. We didn't know what it was doing, but the ripped tent was a stark reminder of our vulnerability. Then the scratching started again, this time on the roof of the tent. It was a frantic, scraping sound, like something was trying to claw its way through the thin fabric above our heads. It was trying to get in. Chloe whimpered, tears streaming down her face. Liam, despite his fear, seemed to be trying to think rationally. We need to get out of here. We can't just stay trapped in this tent. But where would we go? I asked, my voice trembling. It's out there. We have to try, he insisted. Maybe, if we make a run for it, we can reach the car. The car was parked a good distance away, back at the main parking area. The thought of running through the dark woods, with whatever this thing was lurking nearby, was terrifying, but staying in the tent seemed like a death sentence. Liam grabbed the small camping knife he had brought. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. On 3, he whispered. We'll all run in different directions at first, try to confuse it, then head towards the main path. It was a desperate plan, but we didn't have any better ideas. We nodded in agreement, our fear giving way to a surge of adrenaline. "On to ta," Liam yelled, and we scrambled towards the ripped opening in the tent. As I burst out into the darkness, I caught a fleeting glimpse of something moving in the periphery. It was tall and gaunt, its form silhouetted against the faint starlight filtering through the trees. It moved with an unnatural speed and fluidity, its limbs long and spindly. I didn't wait to get a better look. I turned and ran as fast as my legs could carry me, the cold night air stinging my lungs. I could hear Chloe and Liam crashing through the underbrush behind me, each of us running for our lives. The woods were a blur of shadows and tangled branches. I stumbled and fell several times, scraping my knees and hands, but I didn't dare to stop. I could hear the sounds of pursuit behind me, the snapping of twigs, the rustling of leaves, and a low, guttural growl that seemed to be getting closer. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I didn't know where I was going. I just kept running, hoping to somehow find my way back to the main path. Suddenly, I remembered the stone. Liam had it in his backpack. Could it be connected to this? Had we somehow angered whatever was out there by taking it? As I ran, I risked a glance over my shoulder. In the distance, through the trees, I saw a pair of glowing red eyes. They were fixed on me, and they seemed to pierce through the darkness. I screamed and stumbled, falling to the ground. I scrambled back to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. The red eyes were still there, closer now. Just as I thought it was going to reach me, I heard a shout from the side. "Sophia? Over here?" It was Liam. He was standing near a cluster of large rocks, waving his flashlight frantically. I didn't hesitate. I ran towards the light, my legs burning with exhaustion. I reached Liam, and he pulled me behind the rocks. Chloe joined us a moment later, gasping for breath. "Did you see it?" I asked, my voice hoarse. The red eyes. Liam nodded, his face grim. "Yeah, I saw them too. It's not like anything I've ever seen before." We huddled behind the rocks, trying to catch our breath and figure out what to do next. The sounds of pursuit seemed to have stopped, but we knew it was still out there, somewhere in the darkness. "We need to get to the car," Chloe said, her voice barely a whisper. "If we can just make it to the car." Liam reached into his backpack and pulled out the stone. He looked at it for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. "You know," he said slowly, "ever since we found this, things have been wrong." He held the stone out in his hand, and in the faint light of his flashlight, I could see the strange symbols etched into its surface. They seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Maybe we should put it back." Liam said, his voice filled with uncertainty. "Maybe that's what it wants." It was a long shot, but we were desperate. We decided to try it. Carefully, Liam placed the stone on the ground near the base of the rocks. We watched it for a moment, holding our breath. Nothing happened. The silence of the woods remained unbroken. We waited for several minutes, but there was no sign of the creature. Finally, Liam stood up. "Okay," he whispered. Let's try to make a run for it. Stick close together this time. We crept out from behind the rocks, our senses on high alert. The woods were still dark and menacing, but the feeling of immediate pursuit seemed to have lessened. We walked as quickly and quietly as we could, sticking to the edges of the trees, trying to stay out of the open. The main path felt miles away. After what felt like an eternity, we finally saw it, the faint glow of the parking lot lights through the trees. We broke into a run, our remaining energy fueled by a desperate hope. We burst out of the woods and into the parking lot, our eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of the creature. The parking lot was empty and silent, except for the gentle hum of the overhead lights. We ran to our car, fumbling with the keys in our panic. Liam finally managed to unlock the doors, and we all piled inside, locking them immediately. We didn't start the engine right away. We just sat there, panting, our hearts still racing. We looked out the windows, but there was no sign of anything. Finally, Liam turned the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. We didn't waste any time. He put the car in drive and sped out of the parking lot, leaving the darkness of Tahquamenon Falls State Park behind us. We didn't speak much on the drive back. We were all too shaken by what had happened. We knew we had experienced something truly terrifying, something that defied explanation. We never went back to Tahquamenon Falls State Park. The memory of the hidden waterfall, the strange carvings, and the terrifying encounter in the woods that night was enough to keep us away. Liam tried to research the symbols on the stone, but he couldn't find any information about them. Eventually, he threw the stone away, hoping to rid himself of whatever connection it might have had to that place. Sometimes, late at night, I still have nightmares about the red eyes in the darkness and the scratching at the tent. I often wonder what those carvings meant and what kind of entity we encountered in those woods. We had gone looking for a hidden beauty, but we found something far more ancient and sinister. And I know deep down that we were lucky to have made it out alive. Some places are best left unexplored, some secrets best left undisturbed. We learned that lesson the hard way in the dark, terrifying woods of Tahquamenon Falls. My name is Liam, and if there's one thing I live for, it's the thrill of conquering a challenging mountain bike trail. The steeper the incline, the more technical the descent, the more alive I feel. It's a kind of meditation for me. The rhythmic pumping of my legs, the wind whipping past my face, the focus required to navigate roots and rocks. It's just me, my bike, and the wilderness. Or at least, that's how it's supposed to be. I've explored trails all over the Midwest, but there's something uniquely captivating about the Keweenaw Peninsula in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. The rugged terrain, the dense forests that seem to stretch on forever, and the breathtaking views of Lake Superior. It's a biker's paradise. I'd been planning this trip for months, poring over trail maps, checking weather forecasts, and meticulously prepping my gear. This wasn't just a casual ride. This was going to be an adventure. The day I set out, the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. I'd chosen a trail system known for its challenging climbs and exhilarating downhill sections. The trailhead was relatively quiet, just a few other hikers and bikers gearing up, their faces etched with the same anticipation I felt. I gave a nod to a couple passing by, a silent acknowledgement of our shared passion for the wild. The first few hours were exactly what I'd hoped for. The trail wound its way through thick woods, sunlight dappling through the canopy above. The climbs were tough, my lungs burning and my muscles screaming, but the panoramic vistas from the higher elevations made it all worthwhile. I stopped a few times to catch my breath, take a swig of water, and snap some photos. The beauty of the Keweenaw is truly something special, a raw, untamed landscape that makes you feel both insignificant and connected to something ancient. I was feeling good, pushing my limits, enjoying the solitude. I'd packed plenty of snacks and water, and my bike was performing flawlessly. I was in my element, lost in the rhythm of the ride, my mind clear of the usual clutter of daily life. I navigated tight switchbacks, flew over small jumps, and powered through rocky sections, a grin plastered across my face. This was exactly what I needed: an escape, a challenge, a reminder of the simple joys of movement and nature. As the afternoon wore on, the trails became less crowded. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees. I checked my map a couple of times just to make sure I was on track. I had planned a loop that would bring me back to the trailhead before nightfall. I was making good time, feeling confident and energized. Then came the turn. It wasn't clearly marked, just a subtle fork in the path, almost hidden by a fallen log. I was going a bit faster than I should have been, my focus slightly wavering as I mentally patted myself on the back for a great ride so far. I took the right fork, assuming it was a shortcut or another part of the main loop. It looked like a trail, albeit a less maintained one, narrower and with more overgrown vegetation. At first, it wasn't too concerning. The trail was still rideable, though I had to be more careful of low, hanging branches and loose rocks. I figured it would eventually reconnect with the main trail. I kept going, enjoying the slightly more secluded feel of this path. The forest seemed denser here, the air a little cooler, and the sounds of the main trail, the occasional whoops of other riders, the distant chatter of hikers faded away. After about 15 minutes, however, a nagging feeling started to creep into my mind. The trail hadn't widened or shown any signs of rejoining the main loop. In fact, it seemed to be getting narrower and more overgrown, as if it hadn't been used in a long time. I checked my GPS, but the signal was weak and unreliable under the thick canopy. My paper map wasn't detailed enough to show this smaller path. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I should have paid more attention at that fork. I should have stopped and double-checked. Now, I was on a path that seemed to lead nowhere. The trees around me were tall and imposing, their branches intertwined overhead, creating a dim, almost claustrophobic tunnel. The forest floor was covered in a thick layer of decaying leaves and pine needles, muffling the sound of my tires. I decided to turn around. It was the logical thing to do. But as I tried to maneuver my bike in the narrow space, I realized it wasn't going to be easy. The trail had become so tight that I could barely turn the handlebars. I had to dismount and try to push the bike backwards, which was awkward and slow, going on the uneven terrain. After what felt like an eternity, I finally managed to turn the bike around. I remounted and started pedaling back the way I came, my initial confidence replaced by a growing sense of anxiety. I kept an eye out for the fork in the trail, the one I had mistakenly taken. But the more I rode, the more unfamiliar the surroundings seemed. Had I gone further than I thought, or had the path somehow changed? Panic started to bubble up inside me. The sun was getting lower, casting long, distorted shadows that danced and flickered in my peripheral vision. The woods were growing darker, the air colder. The sounds of the forest, which had once been soothing, now seemed to carry a hint of something else, something unsettling. Then I saw them. Through a break in the trees, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. Shacks. Old dilapidated shacks huddled together in a small clearing. They looked like they had been abandoned for decades, their wooden walls weathered and rotting, their roofs sagging and covered in moss. The windows were dark and empty, like vacant eyes staring out into the woods. I stopped pedaling, my heart pounding in my chest. What were these shacks doing here, deep in the forest, far from any marked trails? This wasn't the kind of scenery you expected in a recreational area. There was something inherently wrong about them, a sense of decay and neglect that felt heavy and oppressive. As I stood there staring at the shacks, a feeling washed over me, a feeling so intense and visceral that it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, the feeling of being watched. It wasn't a general sense of unease. It was a specific, targeted feeling, as if unseen eyes were boring into me from the shadows of the trees, from the dark windows of the shacks. I scanned the surrounding woods, my eyes darting from tree to tree, but I saw nothing, just the silent, watchful forest. Yet the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing second. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like a trespasser in a place I didn't belong. Then I heard it, a whisper. Faint at first, carried on the gentle breeze that rustled through the leaves. It sounded like someone speaking, but the words were indistinct, just a soft, sibilant murmur. I held my breath, straining to hear. The whisper came again, a little louder this time, and I could almost make out a sound, a syllable. My name. It was my name, whispered on the wind, a chilling, disembodied voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Liam. The whisper repeated, closer now, more insistent, sending a shiver of pure terror down my spine. I didn't wait to hear more. I didn't try to rationalize what I had heard. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to get out of there, to put as much distance as possible between myself and those shacks, and whatever was lurking in the woods. I jumped back on my bike, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the handlebars. I started pedaling frantically, pushing myself harder than I ever had before. The narrow trail was treacherous in the fading light, but I didn't dare slow down. I kept my head down, my eyes fixed on the path ahead, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched, trying to block out the sound of my name echoing in the wind. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what might be following me. All I wanted was to get back to the main trail, back to safety, back to the familiar world I knew. The woods around me seemed to press in, the shadows growing longer and darker, the whispers seemingly closer. I pedaled on, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my legs burning, my heart pounding with a primal fear I had never experienced before. This wasn't just a bad decision. This felt like the beginning of something truly terrifying. The frantic pedaling felt like an eternity. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig under my tires sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. The whispers seemed to fade in and out, sometimes sounding distant, other times so close I felt like someone was breathing down my neck. I kept my head down, focused on the narrow ribbon of dirt in front of me, the beam from my helmet, light cutting a weak swath through the encroaching darkness. The trail remained stubbornly narrow and overgrown, showing no signs of connecting back to the main network. My lungs burned with each labored breath, and my legs screamed in protest, but the fear propelling me forward was a far stronger motivator than physical discomfort. I risked a quick glance over my shoulder every now and then, but all I saw were the deepening shadows of the forest, the darkness swallowing the trees whole. The feeling of being watched hadn't lessened. If anything, it had intensified. It was as if invisible eyes were tracking my every move, their gaze heavy and malevolent. I imagined shadowy figures lurking just beyond the edge of my light, their forms obscured by the darkness, waiting for me to stumble or fall. Then, I heard another sound, something different from the whispers. It was a low, guttural moan, carried on the wind. It sounded ancient and pained, like the sound an injured animal might make, but somehow wrong. Deeper, more resonant, with an undercurrent of something sinister that made my blood run cold. The moan echoed through the trees, and then another followed, closer this time. They seemed to be coming from the direction of the shacks, but it was hard to tell for sure. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the woods. Whatever was out there, it wasn't natural. I pushed myself harder, my tires slipping on loose gravel as I tried to gain speed. The trail started to descend sharply, becoming even more treacherous in the darkness. I bounced over roots and rocks, my body jolting with each impact. I knew I should slow down, be more careful, but the thought of whatever was behind me spurred me on, overriding any sense of caution. Suddenly, the trail took a sharp turn, and I found myself on a section that was even more overgrown than before. Thorny bushes scraped against my arms and legs, tearing at my clothes. Low-hanging branches whipped across my face, and I had to duck and weave to avoid being knocked off my bike. This wasn't a trail anymore. It felt like I was bushwhacking through the wilderness. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I was lost. It was getting darker by the minute, and there was something out there in the woods with me, something that whispered my name and moaned with an unholy sound. I had made a terrible mistake taking that wrong turn. A stupid, careless mistake that might cost me dearly. I stopped for a moment, leaning heavily on my handlebars, trying to catch my breath and get my bearings. My helmet light illuminated a small patch of the forest floor, revealing nothing but decaying leaves and tangled undergrowth. The silence, apart from my own ragged breathing, was deafening. The whispers and moans had stopped, but the feeling of being watched was still there, a palpable weight in the air. Maybe it was my imagination fueled by fear and exhaustion. Maybe I was just spooked by the old shacks and the isolation of the woods. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. There was something wrong here, something deeply unsettling. As I stood there, trying to decide what to do, I noticed something on the ground. A small, glinting object caught the beam of my helmet light. I bent down to take a closer look. It was a button, old and tarnished, made of what looked like bone. There were strange symbols etched into its surface, symbols I didn't recognize. I picked it up, turning it over in my gloved hand. It felt cold and smooth, and the symbols seemed to writhe and shift in the dim light. An inexplicable sense of dread washed over me as I held it. This button felt wrong, like it belonged to something ancient and malevolent. I quickly dropped it back onto the ground, as if it had burned my hand. I didn't want to touch it anymore. I didn't want anything to do with it. I just want to get out of these woods. I decided to try and find some kind of landmark, anything that would tell me where I was. I scanned the trees around me, looking for anything unusual. That's when I saw it, a flash of white in the darkness. My heart leaped with a surge of hope. Maybe it was a trail marker, or a piece of litter left by another hiker. Anything would be better than this endless, overgrown path. I pushed my bike towards the white object, my helmet light cutting through the darkness. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't a trail marker or a litter. It was a bone, a human bone. My stomach lurched, and I stumbled backwards, my hand flying to my mouth. The bone was long and slender, a femur perhaps, and it was bleached white and smooth. It looked old, like it had been lying there for a long time. I shone my light around, and that's when I saw them. More bones, scattered among the leaves and undergrowth. Rib bones, vertebrae, even a skull, its empty eye sockets staring up at the darkness. I was in some kind of makeshift graveyard, deep in the woods, far from any trail. Who were these people? What had happened to them? A wave of nausea washed over me, and I had to fight the urge to vomit. The whisper started again, softer this time, almost like a gentle breeze rustling through the leaves. But I knew what they were saying. They were calling my name. Liam, Liam. The moans returned too, closer now, more insistent. They seemed to be coming from all around me, echoing through the trees, surrounding me in a chorus of pain and despair. I had to get out of here. Now, I jumped back on my bike, my hands trembling so violently I could barely hold on. I started pedaling again faster than before, my eyes darting around, searching for any sign of a way out. Up ahead through the trees, I saw a faint light. It was a soft, flickering glow like a lantern or a campfire. Hope surged through me again. Maybe it was another hiker, someone who could help me. I steered my bike towards the light, pushing through the dense undergrowth. The light grew brighter as I got closer, and I could make out the shape of a small clearing. In the center of the clearing, there was a fire burning, casting flickering shadows on the surrounding trees. And then I saw the figure sitting by the fire. It was hunched over, its back to me, wrapped in what looked like a tattered blanket. Its head was bowed, and long, matted hair hung down, obscuring its face. It didn't move, didn't seem to notice my approach. "Hello," I called out, my voice hoarse and shaky. "Can you help me? I'm lost." The figure didn't respond. It remained motionless, its back still to me. "Excuse me," I said a little louder this time. "I need help. I took a wrong turn and I can't find my way back." Still, the figure didn't move. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the crackling of the fire. I slowly dismounted my bike, my eyes fixed on the figure. There was something about its stillness, its unnatural posture, that made me uneasy. I took a tentative step closer, and that's when I saw it. The figure's hands. They were long and thin, with gnarled fingers and sharp yellowed nails. They were resting on its lap, and they were clutching something. Something that looked like a bone. A human bone. My blood ran cold. This wasn't another hiker. This was something else. Something that sat by a fire in the middle of the woods, surrounded by human remains. The figure slowly began to turn its head. Its movements were jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. Long, stringy hair fell away from its face, revealing features that were gaunt and pale. Its eyes were wide and black, with no hint of white. They stared at me with an ancient, malevolent hunger. A low, guttural growl rumbled from its throat. It wasn't human. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran, abandoning my bike, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure rose to its feet, its movements surprisingly swift despite its frail appearance. I could hear it behind me, its bare feet pounding on the forest floor, its guttural growls growing louder. I ran blindly through the trees, branches tearing at my clothes, my lungs burning. I could feel its presence behind me, close, too close. I could hear its rag breathing, its wet, clicking sounds. Then I stumbled and fell, landing hard on the ground. I scrambled to my feet, but it was too late. The figure was upon me, its shadow looming over me in the flickering firelight. Its eyes burned into mine, filled with an ancient, insatiable hunger. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of sharp, pointed teeth. And then it whispered my name, its voice a raspy, chilling sound that echoed through the silent woods. Liam, the creature's breath, stale and smelling of decay, washed over my face. Its black eyes seemed to pierce through me, seeing not just my fear, but something deeper, something essential. The guttural growls intensified, vibrating in its chest, and its sharp teeth glinted in the firelight. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this thing was not of this world. Panic gave way to a primal surge of adrenaline. I had to fight. I scrambled backwards, trying to put some distance between us, my hands scrabbling on the leaf-strewn ground. The creature lunged, its long, thin arms reaching for me with surprising speed. I instinctively threw my arms up to block it, and its claws, sharp as shards of glass, raked across my forearm, tearing through my jacket and drawing blood. The pain was searing, but it jolted me into action. I kicked out with my legs, catching the creature in the chest. It stumbled back, momentarily surprised. That was all the opening I needed. I scrambled to my feet and turned to run, my injured arm throbbing. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched, unearthly sound that echoed through the trees, and started to pursue me again. I plunged back into the darkness, the flickering firelight quickly fading behind me. I could still hear the creature crashing through the undergrowth, its movements unnervingly fast and agile. I ran blindly, my only thought to get away, to escape this nightmare. The woods seemed to twist and turn around me, the trees blurring into a dark, impenetrable mass. I could feel the creature gaining on me, its heavy breathing and the snapping of twigs growing louder. Desperation clawed at me. I needed a weapon, anything to defend myself. My hand instinctively went to my belt, where I usually carried a small multi-tool. My fingers fumbled for it, finally finding the cold metal. I pulled it out, flipping open the small knife blade. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The creature was still behind me, its pale form a fleeting glimpse in the darkness. Its eyes glowed with an eerie intensity, like embers in the night. I veered off the path, hoping to lose it in the denser undergrowth. Thorns and branches tore at my skin, but I ignored the pain, my focus solely on putting distance between myself and the creature. Then I saw another light through the trees, fainter than the fire, but still a beacon of hope. It seemed to be coming from the direction I had initially seen the shacks. A terrible thought struck me. What if the shacks were where this thing came from? What if there were more of them, but I had no other choice? The creature was gaining on me, and the light offered the only potential escape. I changed direction, heading towards the faint glow, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. As I got closer, the light grew stronger, revealing the dilapidated shacks huddled together in the clearing. They looked even more sinister in the darkness, their dark windows like gaping maws. The air around them felt heavy and oppressive, filled with a sense of ancient decay. I hesitated for a moment, fear warring with desperation. Should I risk going near those shacks again? But the sounds of the creature's pursuit were getting closer, leaving me with no other option. I ran towards the nearest shack, its wooden walls rotting and covered in moss. The door hung crookedly on its hinges, a dark, gaping hole in the side of the building. I didn't stop to think, I just plunged inside, hoping to find some kind of refuge. The interior of the shack was even worse than I had imagined. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and something else, something sickly sweet and indescribably foul. Dust and cobwebs hung in thick layers, and the floorboards creaked ominously under my weight. Moonlight filtered through cracks in the walls, casting long, distorted shadows that danced and wreathed around me. I could hear the creature outside, its snarls and growls echoing through the thin wooden walls. I frantically searched for another way out, my eyes scanning the darkness. There was a small, boarded-up window on the far side of the shack. I rushed towards it, pulling at the loose planks. They were rotten and came away easily, revealing a small opening. It was just big enough to squeeze through. I didn't hesitate. I pushed my way through the opening, scraping my skin on the rough edges of the wood. I tumbled out onto the other side, landing hard on the ground. I scrambled to my feet and looked back at the shack. The creature was silhouetted in the doorway, its black eyes burning in the darkness. It let out a frustrated roar, unable to follow me through the small opening. I didn't waste any time. I ran away from the shacks, back into the relative safety of the woods. I could still hear the creature's enraged cries behind me, but it seemed to be staying near the clearing. I kept running, my legs burning, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to keep moving, to put as much distance as possible between myself and that thing. After what felt like hours, the first hint of dawn began to break through the trees. The darkness slowly receded, replaced by a pale, ethereal light. The sounds of the forest began to change, the chirping of birds replacing the creature's terrifying growls. As the sun rose higher in the sky, the woods began to look less menacing. The shadows retreated, and the familiar shapes of trees and bushes emerged from the darkness. I finally started to feel a glimmer of hope. I stumbled upon a small stream and gratefully drank the cold, clear water. I washed the blood from my arm and examined the wound. It was deep but didn't seem life-threatening. I kept walking, following the stream, hoping it would lead me back to a trail. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, I heard the distant sound of voices. My heart leaped with joy. I wasn't alone. I pushed through the last of the trees and found myself on a familiar trail. There were other hikers in the distance, their brightly colored backpacks a welcome sight. I ran towards them, shouting for help. They looked surprised to see me, disheveled and covered in dirt and blood. I told them what had happened, my voice still hoarse and shaky. They listened with wide eyes, their faces etched with disbelief and concern. One of them called for help on their satellite phone. It took several hours for the authorities to arrive. I led them back to the area where I had seen the shacks, but there was no trace of them. The clearing was empty, the fire long since burned out. There were no bones, no sign of the creature. The police searched the area thoroughly, but they found nothing. They chalked it up to a hallucination, the result of exhaustion and dehydration. They couldn't explain my injuries, but they suggested I might have fallen or gotten tangled in some thorny bushes. No one believed my story, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that something evil lurks in the depths of the Quinaw Peninsula, something ancient and hungry. I never went mountain biking in the Quinaw again. In fact, I haven't been on a bike in months. The memory of those black eyes, the chilling whispers of my name, the guttural moans echoing through the woods, they still haunt my dreams. Sometimes late at night, when the wind howls outside my window, I think I can still hear the whispers, faint and distant, calling my name, Liam Lamb, and I know, with a cold certainty, that whatever I encountered that day is still out there waiting in the darkness. And maybe, just maybe, it's waiting for me to make another wrong turn. My name is Ava, and I've always been drawn to the quiet solitude of nature. Growing up in Michigan, camping trips were a staple of our family vacations. We'd explore the vast forests, hike scenic trails, and fall asleep under a canopy of stars, the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves our lullaby. These were the memories I cherished, the ones that painted a picture of peace and tranquility. That's why, when my dad suggested a camping trip to Muskegon State Park, I was immediately on board. It had been a while since we'd all gone together, just my parents, my younger brother, Liam, and me. And of course, our ever-faithful golden retriever, Gus. Muskegon State Park is a gem on the western coast of Michigan, nestled between Lake Michigan and Muskegon Lake. It boasts miles of sandy shoreline, towering dunes, and dense woodlands, offering a perfect blend of relaxation and adventure. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, the late summer air still warm, but carrying a hint of the crispness of autumn. The campground was relatively quiet, with families setting up their tents and the faint aroma of charcoal grills drifting through the air. We found a secluded spot nestled amongst the trees, a decent distance from the other campers, which suited us just fine. We preferred our little bubble of wilderness. Setting up camp was a familiar routine. My dad, a seasoned outdoorsman, took charge of the tent, while my mom organized our cooking supplies and Liam, ever the enthusiastic helper, gathered firewood. Gus, his tail wagging furiously, explored our temporary domain, sniffing every tree and bush as if he were on a mission of utmost importance. I helped where I could, but mostly I just enjoyed the feeling of being away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life, the digital world fading into the background as the natural world took center stage. The first evening was idyllic. We cooked hot dogs and s'mores over a crackling campfire, sharing stories and laughing. The sunset painted the sky in hues of orange, pink, and purple, casting long shadows through the trees. Gus lay contentedly by the fire, occasionally letting out a soft sigh as he drifted in and out of sleep. Everything felt right, peaceful, and exactly as I remembered those childhood camping trips. As the stars began to pepper the inky sky, we retreated to our tent. Liam, always the first to fall asleep, was snoring softly within minutes. My parents were soon to follow, their breathing becoming deep and rhythmic. I, however, found myself a little restless. The sounds of the forest at night were always more pronounced, more alive. The gentle hoot of an owl, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, the distant croaking of frogs. It was a symphony of nature, but one that also held a certain mystery. I eventually drifted off to sleep, only to be jolted awake sometime later by a frantic barking. It was Gus. His usually cheerful bark was replaced by a low, guttural growl that escalated into a series of sharp, panicked yelps. He was pacing back and forth at the entrance of our tent, his body rigid, his ears perked up and swiveling as if trying to pinpoint a specific sound or presence in the darkness. "What's wrong with him?" My mom mumbled sleepily. "I don't know." My dad replied, his voice groggy. He reached out and tried to soothe Gus, but our normally obedient dog was having none of it. He continued to bark relentlessly, his gaze fixed on the woods beyond our campsite. It was a dark night, the moon hidden behind a thick layer of clouds. We couldn't see anything beyond the immediate vicinity of our tent, but Gus's fear was palpable. It was a raw, primal fear that sent a shiver down my spine. We tried everything to calm him down. We spoke to him in soothing voices, we offered him treats, but he remained agitated, his barking echoing through the silent campground. It was so unlike him. Gus was usually a friendly, laid-back dog, always eager for a belly rub or a game of fetch. I had never seen him this scared before. Maybe he heard an animal. My dad suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. We were all thinking the same thing. This felt different. There was an intensity to Gus's fear that suggested he wasn't just reacting to a raccoon or a deer. After what felt like an eternity, Gus's barking finally subsided, replaced by a low, continuous whine. He remained tense, however, his eyes still fixed on the darkness. We stayed awake for a while longer, listening intently to the sounds of the night, but all we could hear were the usual forest noises. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and we all drifted back to a fitful sleep. The first rays of dawn filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the forest floor. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. We emerged from our tent, stiff and slightly on edge after the unsettling night. Gus, though calmer, still seemed a little skittish, sticking close to our sides as we started to make breakfast. As my dad went to fetch some water from the nearby spigot, Liam pointed to the ground near the edge of our tent. "What are those?" he asked, his voice filled with curiosity. We all gathered around to look. There, in the soft mud that had been dampened by the morning dew, were a series of tracks. They were large, much larger than any animal we were familiar with in the area. They weren't deer tracks, which were common in the park. They weren't bear tracks either. The shape was wrong. These tracks were long and somewhat narrow, with what looked like distinct toe marks, but they were far too big for a raccoon or a fox. My dad, a man who had spent countless hours in the woods studying wildlife, was visibly perplexed. He knelt down to examine the tracks more closely, tracing their outline with his finger. "I've never seen anything like this before," he muttered, his brow furrowed in thought. The tracks circled our tent, as if something had been walking around us in the night. They were clear in the mud, and we could follow them for a short distance before they disappeared into the denser undergrowth. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a large dog that had wandered into the campground, but the size and shape of the tracks didn't quite fit. And why would Gus have been so terrified of another dog? A sense of unease settled over our campsite, replacing the peaceful atmosphere of the previous day. The strange tracks, coupled with Gus's frantic barking, painted a picture of an unknown presence lurking in the woods around us. We tried to shrug it off, telling ourselves it was probably nothing, just some unusual animal we couldn't identify. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted, a feeling that something wasn't quite right in the tranquil woods of Muskegon State Park. The silence of the forest suddenly felt less serene and more watchful. Breakfast that morning was a subdued affair. The usual cheerful chatter was replaced by hushed speculation about the tracks. My mom suggested it might have been a deer with an unusual gait, but even she didn't sound convinced. Liam, ever the imaginative one, whispered about Bigfoot, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. My dad, practical as always, pulled out his phone, hoping to find some information about unusual wildlife sightings in the area, but the reception was spotty at best. Gus, still a little on edge, kept glancing towards the woods, his ears twitching at every rustle of leaves. We decided to keep him on his leash for the time being, just in case whatever had left those tracks was still around. After breakfast, we debated what to do. We had planned to spend another night camping, but the unsettling events of the previous night had cast a shadow over our plans. My mom was leaning towards packing up and heading home, but my dad argued that we shouldn't let a little mystery ruin our trip. He suggested we go for a hike on one of the park's trails, hoping to clear our heads and maybe even find some explanation for the tracks. Liam and I were both curious, albeit a little apprehensive, so we agreed. We chose a trail that wound through a dense section of the forest, promising scenic views and a chance to immerse ourselves in nature. My dad led the way, his walking stick tapping rhythmically on the path. Gus trotted beside me, his leash held firmly in my hand. The air was cool and damp under the thick canopy of trees, and the sunlight filtered through in dappled patterns on the forest floor. For a while, the hike was uneventful. We saw the usual woodland creatures, squirrels scampering up trees, a few birds flitting through the branches, but nothing out of the ordinary. We tried to focus on the beauty of the surroundings, pointing out interesting fungi and colorful wildflowers. But the image of those strange tracks lingered in the back of my mind, a nagging reminder that something unknown had been close to us in the darkness. As we ventured deeper into the woods, the trail became narrower and more overgrown. The sounds of the campground faded behind us, replaced by the natural symphony of the forest, the chirping of insects, the gentle murmur of a nearby stream, the rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was the kind of peaceful soundscape I usually found comforting, but today it felt different. Every snap of a twig, every distant bird call, made me jump slightly. About an hour into our hike, Gus suddenly stopped dead in his tracks, his body going rigid. He let out a low growl, his gaze fixed on something ahead of us on the trail. We followed his line of sight, but at first we didn't see anything. Then, as we got closer, we noticed another set of tracks. These tracks were identical to the ones we had found around our tent, but they were fresher, clearer. The mud on the trail was still damp, suggesting they had been made relatively recently. And there were more of them this time, a series of distinct prints leading further down the path. A wave of unease washed over me. This wasn't just a random animal wandering through the campground. Whatever had made these tracks had been here, on this very trail, perhaps just moments before us. My dad cautiously approached the tracks, examining them with a worried expression. "These are definitely the same," he said, his voice low. "And look at the stride, it's huge." He pointed to the distance between the prints, which was indeed remarkably long. Whatever had made these tracks had a very large gait. Liam, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it is Bigfoot," he said, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. My dad chuckled nervously. "No, Liam, let's not jump to conclusions. There's probably a perfectly logical explanation for all of this." But even as he said the words, I could see a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He was just as perplexed as we were. We followed the tracks for a short distance, our pace slowing, our senses heightened. The air seemed to grow heavier, the silence of the forest more profound. It felt like we were being watched, though we couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Then we heard it, a sound that made the blood run cold. It started as a low, guttural moan, a sound that seemed to emanate from deep within the woods. It was unlike anything I had ever heard before. Not the howl of a coyote, not the call of an owl, not the grunt of a bear. It was something else entirely, something primal and unsettling. Gus reacted instantly. He whined and tried to pull back on his leash, his fur standing on end. My mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Even my dad, usually so calm and collected, looked visibly shaken. The moan came again, this time closer, louder. It was a drawn-out, mournful sound that seemed to vibrate through the trees. It sent a shiver of pure terror down my spine. "What was that?" Liam whispered, his voice trembling. My dad shook his head, his face pale. I don't know. The sound was enough to make us stop in our tracks. We stood there, frozen, listening intently. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Then silence. A heavy, oppressive silence that was almost more unnerving than the moan itself. We didn't need to say anything. We all knew we had to get out of there. We turned around and started to retrace our steps, our pace quickening. Gus, sensing our fear, pulled ahead, eager to leave the unsettling presence behind. The hike back to our campsite felt much longer and more treacherous than the way in. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat. Every rustle of leaves sounded like approaching footsteps. We kept looking over our shoulders, half expecting to see something or someone emerge from the trees. When we finally reached our campsite, we practically collapsed with relief. The familiar sight of our tent and camping gear was a welcome comfort. Without a word, we started to pack up. My mom was a whirlwind of efficiency, throwing things into bags with a frantic energy. My dad, though still visibly shaken, took charge of dismantling the tent. Liam and I helped where we could, our movements quick and jerky. Gus, sensing our urgency, stayed close by, occasionally letting out a nervous whine. The earlier skittishness had returned amplified. He kept looking towards the woods, his ears constantly swiveling. As we were packing the last of our gear into the car, Liam suddenly pointed towards the edge of the woods, his finger trembling. "Look," he exclaimed. We all turned to see what he was pointing at. There, partially hidden behind a thick oak tree, was a fleeting glimpse of something tall and dark. It was only visible for a second, a brief shadow moving amongst the trees, before it disappeared from sight. We stared at the spot for a long moment, our hearts pounding in our chests. Had we really seen something? Or was it just our imaginations fueled by fear and paranoia? "Did you see that?" My mom whispered, her voice filled with terror. My dad nodded slowly, his eyes wide. "I think so." Whatever it was tall, very tall, and it was watching us. That was the final straw. We didn't need any more convincing. We piled into the car, our faces pale and drawn. My dad started the engine, and we didn't waste a single second pulling out of the campsite. As we drove away, I couldn't help but look back at the woods, a sense of dread washing over me. The trees seemed darker now, more menacing. The silence no longer felt peaceful, but held a sinister undertone. We didn't talk much on the drive home. The unspoken fear hung heavy in the air. We had gone into the woods seeking peace and tranquility, but we had found something else entirely, something unknown, something unsettling, something that had left its mark on the forest floor, and a lingering fear in our hearts. The camping trip to Muskegon State Park had taken a dark turn, and I had a feeling that whatever we had encountered out there wasn't finished with us yet. The memory of those large, mysterious tracks and that chilling moan would forever be etched in my mind, a haunting reminder of the true horrors that can lurk in the seemingly serene embrace of nature. The drive home was tense and silent. Every time a car passed us in the opposite direction, our headlights briefly illuminating the surrounding woods, I couldn't help but feel a prickle of anxiety, a sense that something was still out there watching. Gus remained unusually quiet in the back seat, occasionally letting out a soft whimper. He seemed to share our unease, his usual happy-go-lucky demeanor replaced by a nervous apprehension. We arrived home in the late afternoon, the familiar comfort of our house a stark contrast to the unsettling atmosphere of the campground. We quickly unloaded the car, eager to be inside, surrounded by the normalcy of our everyday lives. My mom immediately started making a pot of coffee, her hands still shaking slightly. My dad busied himself locking all the doors and windows, a habit he didn't usually indulge in to such an extent. Liam, pale and quiet, retreated to his room, probably to process everything that had happened. I found myself pacing around the living room, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside the window, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I kept replaying the events of the past 2 days in my mind, Gus's frantic barking, the strange tracks, the chilling moan, and that fleeting glimpse of the tall, dark figure in the woods. It all felt surreal, like something out of a nightmare. Later that evening, after a quiet and somewhat strained dinner, my dad decided to do some research. He pulled out his laptop and started searching for information about strange occurrences or unexplained phenomena in the Muskegon State Park area. My mom and I sat with him, our eyes glued to the screen as he scrolled through various websites and forums. We found a few old local legends about a tall, shadowy figure said to roam the forests, a creature whispered about in hushed tones around campfires. Some called it a wendigo, others simply referred to it as the tall man of the woods. The descriptions were vague and often contradictory, but there were recurring themes of unusual size, unnatural speed, and a haunting, mournful cry. As we read through these accounts, a chill ran down my spine. The moan we had heard in the woods, it matched the descriptions in some of the stories. And the tall, dark figure Liam and my dad had seen, it also seemed to fit. Could there be something to these old legends? Could we have stumbled upon something truly inexplicable in those woods? We stayed up late that night, talking in low voices, trying to make sense of what had happened. We considered the possibility of a bear, but the tracks were all wrong. We thought about a large dog, but again, the size and shape didn't fit, and Gus's terrified reaction was hard to dismiss. The only explanation that seemed to align with everything we had experienced, however unsettling, was the possibility of something else. Something unknown and potentially dangerous. The next few days were filled with a lingering sense of unease. Every time Gus barked at the backyard fence, I would instinctively look towards the woods bordering our property, half expecting to see those large, strange tracks again. We started being more cautious, locking doors at night, checking windows before bed. It felt like the peace and security of our home had been subtly tainted by our experience in the park. About a week after our camping trip, I was home alone one afternoon. My parents were at work and Liam was at a friend's house. I was in the living room reading a book when I heard a scratching sound at the back door. Gus, who had been dozing at my feet, immediately perked up, his ears twitching. I cautiously got up and peered through the peephole. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, I looked down. There, in the small patch of mud just outside our back door, was a single, unmistakable track. It was the same shape and size as the ones we had found in Muskegon State Park. My heart pounded in my chest. It couldn't be. How could it have followed us all the way home? A wave of fear washed over me, cold and paralyzing. I stumbled back from the door, my mind racing. Was it still out there? Was it watching me? I grabbed my phone and frantically called my dad. My voice was trembling as I told him what I had found. He was understandably alarmed and told me to stay inside and not open the door for anyone. He said he would leave work immediately and come home. The wait for my parents to arrive felt like an eternity. Every sound in the house made me jump. I kept looking out the windows, scanning the backyard, the woods beyond our fence, searching for any sign of movement. Gus stayed close to my side, whimpering softly, his eyes darting nervously around the room. When my parents finally arrived, they were both visibly shaken. My dad went outside to examine the track. He confirmed my fears it was the same print. But how and why? We spent the rest of the day on edge, constantly looking over our shoulders. We called the local police to report what we had found, but they were skeptical. Without any further evidence or any reports of similar incidents, they couldn't offer much help. They suggested it might have been a prank, someone trying to scare us. But we knew better. This was no prank. That night, we all slept with the lights on. Every creak of the house, every rustle outside, sent us into a state of heightened alert. It felt like the shadow we had encountered in the woods had followed us home, its presence lingering just beyond the edges of our safe, familiar world. Over the next few weeks, we remained vigilant. My dad installed motion sensor lights around the perimeter of our property. We made sure to always lock all doors and windows, even during the day. We were constantly looking for any further signs, any indication that the thing we had encountered was still around. Thankfully, we didn't find any more tracks. There were no more strange noises or sightings. Gradually, the initial fear began to subside, replaced by a lingering unease, a constant awareness that something unknown was out there. But sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet and the wind whispers through the trees outside my window, I still hear it. A low, mournful moan that seems to carry on the breeze, a haunting reminder of our camping trip to Muskegon State Park. And sometimes, when Gus barks unexpectedly at the woods behind our house, I can't help but feel a prickle of fear, a chilling certainty that the shadow we encountered in those woods might still be watching, waiting. We made a bad decision going into those woods, and I fear the consequences may linger longer than we ever imagined. The peace of nature has been forever tainted for me, replaced by the haunting memory of those strange tracks and the unsettling feeling that we are not always alone in the wilderness. My name is Caleb, and if there's one thing I love more than the smell of pine needles after a summer rain, it's the feeling of my boots crunching on a well-worn hiking trail. There's a certain peace that comes with being alone in the wilderness, a sense of disconnecting from the constant noise of everyday life, and reconnecting with something ancient and real. I've hiked trails all over the Midwest, from the rolling hills of Indiana to the dense forests of Wisconsin, always chasing that feeling of solitude and the breathtaking views that often come with a hard climb. For a while now, I'd had my sights set on Mount Arvin, standing at 979 feet above sea level. It's the highest natural point in Michigan, and the pictures I'd seen online promised panoramic vistas of the surrounding wilderness that stretched for miles. It wasn't a particularly technical climb, more of a long, steady uphill trek, but the promise of that view from the top was enough to keep it on my mental to-do list. Finally, a free weekend aligned with a stretch of perfect weather, and I knew it was time. I packed my usual hiking gear, a sturdy backpack with plenty of water and snacks, a first aid kit, you can never be too careful, my trusty hiking poles, and my camera to capture the inevitable beauty. I told a few friends where I was going and when I expect to be back, just as a safety precaution. Even though I was an experienced hiker, it was always good to let someone know your plans, especially when heading out for a solo trip. The drive up to the Upper Peninsula was beautiful in itself. The landscape gradually transformed from flat farmland to rolling hills, and then to the rugged, forested terrain that characterizes that part of Michigan. The air grew crisper and carried the scent of pine and damp earth. By the time I reached the trailhead, I was buzzing with anticipation. The trail started gently, winding its way through a dense forest of maple and birch trees. Sunlight dappled through the leaves, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor. The only sounds were the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. It was exactly the kind of peaceful escape I had been craving. As I gained elevation, the terrain became a bit more challenging. The trail narrowed in places, and there were a few rocky sections that required a bit more careful footing. But the climb was gradual enough that I could maintain a steady pace without feeling too winded. I stopped occasionally to catch my breath, take a sip of water, and admire the changing scenery. The trees began to thin out in places, offering glimpses of the vast wilderness that surrounded me. After a few hours of steady hiking, I started to feel the familiar burn in my legs that told me I was getting closer to the summit. The trees became shorter and more sparse, and the ground underfoot turned rocky. Then, finally, I saw a small wooden sign marking the summit of Mount Arvin. I pushed through the last few steps and emerged into a small clearing. And then I saw the view. It was even more breathtaking than the pictures had suggested. From this vantage point, the world seemed to stretch out endlessly in every direction. Rolling hills covered in dense forest faded into the hazy distance. I could see glimpses of sparkling lakes and winding rivers far below. The sky above was a brilliant blue, dotted with fluffy white clouds that seemed close enough to touch. I found a large, flat rock near the edge of the clearing and sat down to take it all in. The silence up there was profound. It wasn't an empty silence, but rather a deep, resonant quiet that seemed to hum with the energy of the natural world. It was a silence that made the usual background noise of my life traffic, conversations, the constant hum of technology seem distant and insignificant. I spent a good half hour just sitting there, soaking in the view and the stillness. I ate a quick lunch, took some photos to try and capture the incredible panorama, and just let my mind wander. It was exactly the kind of peaceful solitude I had come for. But as the afternoon wore on, a subtle shift began to occur. The silence, which had initially felt so peaceful, started to take on a different quality. It began to feel unnerving. It was so absolute, so complete, that it almost felt like something was missing, like the world had momentarily held its breath. I started to feel a little uneasy. Maybe it was just the isolation getting to me, or maybe it was the fact that I hadn't seen another person on the trail all day. Whatever it was, a prickle of unease began to creep up my spine. I decided it was probably time to start heading back down. The sun was beginning its slow descent in the sky, and I wanted to make sure I had plenty of daylight for the hike back to my car. I stood up, stretched my legs, and took one last look at the stunning view. As I turned to start back down the trail, I heard it. It was faint, almost imperceptible at first, like the whisper of the wind through the trees. But then it came again, a little clearer this time. My name, Caleb. It was a voice, a soft, breathy whisper that seemed to come from the dense trees below the summit. It was definitely a human voice, but it sounded wrong. Distant, ethereal, like it was carried on the wind from a great distance. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, my senses on high alert. I scanned the trees below, trying to see if anyone was there. The forest was thick and dense, the shadows long and deep in the fading light. I couldn't see anything. Caleb. The whisper came again, this time a little closer, a little more distinct. There was no mistaking it. Someone or something was calling my name. But there was no one else around. I was absolutely certain of it. I had been alone on the summit for the better part of an hour, and I hadn't seen a single other hiker on the trail all day. A cold dread began to wash over me. This wasn't right. This wasn't normal. I took a hesitant step towards the edge of the clearing, peering into the shadowy depths of the forest below. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding weak and shaky in the vast silence. Is anyone there? Only the rustling of leaves in the breeze answered me. "Caleb," the whisper came again, closer still. It sounded like it was just beyond the tree line, maybe only a few dozen feet away. The voice was undeniably calling me. My mind raced, trying to come up with a rational explanation. Maybe there was someone down there I hadn't seen. Maybe they had somehow known my name. But the way the voice sounded, the sheer isolation of the location, it all felt deeply wrong. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my initial confusion. This was no friendly greeting. This felt predatory. I didn't wait for the whisper to come again. I turned and practically ran back towards the trail, my heart pounding in my chest. The peaceful silence of the summit had been shattered, replaced by a chilling sense of being watched, of being hunted. I didn't look back. I just kept running, my boots pounding on the rocky ground. The image of the dense, silent forest below burned into my mind. The whisper echoed in my ears, a phantom sound that sent shivers down my spine. I had come to Mount Arvin seeking peace and solitude. I had found something else entirely. And I had a terrifying feeling that whatever had called my name on that lonely mountaintop wasn't finished with me yet. The descent was a blur of adrenaline and terror. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig under my boots sent a jolt of fear through me. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something or someone emerging from the trees, but there was never anything there, just the dense, silent woods watching me with their countless unseen eyes. The whisper hadn't followed me, not audibly anyway, but the feeling of being pursued, of being the focus of some unseen entity's attention, was relentless. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my legs burned with the effort of running downhill, but I didn't dare slow down. The image of that disembodied voice calling my name on the silent summit was burned into my mind, a chilling reminder of the unnatural presence I had encountered. As I descended further, the forest grew denser again, the sunlight struggling to penetrate the thick canopy overhead. The shadows deepened, and familiar shapes in the undergrowth seemed to twist and contort into menacing figures in my panicked imagination. Every fallen log looked like a lurking creature, every swaying branch like a reaching hand. I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe the isolation and the altitude had gotten to me. But the voice had been so clear, so distinct. And it had called my name. There was no mistaking that. Could it have been another hiker? It seemed impossible. I hadn't seen anyone all day, and the way the voice sounded, that ethereal, distant quality, didn't sound like someone just calling out. It felt other. I gripped my hiking poles tightly, their familiar weight offering a small measure of comfort. They wouldn't be much use against whatever had called my name, but they were something solid to hold on to in this increasingly surreal and terrifying situation. The trail, which had seemed so welcoming on the way up, now felt menacing and unfamiliar. Every twist and turn brought a fresh wave of anxiety, the fear of what might be waiting around the next bend gnawing at me. I found myself jumping at the slightest sounds, the hoot of an unseen owl, the scurry of a small animal in the underbrush. My senses were on high alert, every nerve ending screaming with a primal fear. At one point, I stumbled on a root and nearly fell. As I caught myself, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping sound coming from somewhere in the trees to my left. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't the sound of woodpecker. It was too deliberate, too even. It sounded almost like someone gently knocking on a hollow tree trunk. I froze, listening intently. The tapping continued, a steady, unsettling rhythm that seemed to echo through the silent woods. I strained my eyes, trying to see through the dense foliage, but I couldn't make out anything. Tap, tap, tap. The sound sent a fresh wave of fear through me. What was making that noise? Was it connected to the voice I had heard on the summit? My imagination conjured up all sorts of terrifying possibilities, some unseen creature marking my passage, or perhaps something even more sinister. I wanted to run, to put as much distance as possible between myself and that unsettling sound, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear and a morbid curiosity. The tapping continued for what felt like an eternity, then abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was even more oppressive than before, thick with an unspoken threat. I waited for a few moments, holding my breath, listening for any further sounds. When nothing else came, I forced myself to move, my legs feeling heavy and unresponsive. I kept my eyes fixed on the trees where I had heard the tapping, half expecting to see something emerge, but nothing did. As I continued my descent, the feeling of being watched intensified. I could feel eyes on me even though I couldn't see anything. It was a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, a sense of being the focus of an unseen gaze. I kept turning around, scanning the trees, but there was never anything there, just the endless, silent woods. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon now, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees. The forest was growing darker, and the air was getting colder. The familiar comfort of the woods had completely vanished, replaced by a sense of foreboding and menace. Then I heard it again. The whisper. This time it was closer, clearer. It seemed to come from just off the trail, maybe only a few yards away. Caleb, my name spoken in that same soft, breathy tone. It sent a jolt of pure terror through me. This wasn't my imagination. This was real. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I scanned the trees to my right, trying to pinpoint the source of the voice. The undergrowth was thick, and the shadows were deep, making it impossible to see anything clearly. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. "What do you want?" Silence. Only the rustling of leaves in the growing darkness answered me. I took a hesitant step back, my eyes darting nervously from shadow to shadow. I had to get out of here. I had to get back to my car, back to civilization, back to safety. I started to walk again, my pace quickening, my eyes still scanning the trees. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was letting my fear get the better of me. But the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was too strong to ignore. Then I saw something, a flicker of movement in the trees to my left. It was just a brief glimpse, a fleeting shadow moving behind the thick foliage. But I saw it. Something was there. I stopped again, my breath catching in my throat. I stared at the spot where I had seen the movement, my eyes straining in the dim light. And then it stepped out of the trees. It was tall and gaunt, its form indistinct in the fading light. It moved with a strange, jerky gait, its limbs seeming too long and thin. I couldn't make out any features, just a dark, vaguely humanoid shape emerging from the shadows. Fear, raw and primal, flooded through me. This was it. This was what had been calling my name. The figure took another step closer, and then another. It was moving slowly, deliberately, as if it had all the time in the world. I wanted to scream, but my voice seemed to be trapped in my throat. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like lead. I was frozen, paralyzed by the sheer terror of what I was seeing. The figure was closer now, close enough that I could start to make out some details. Its skin looked pale and stretched tight over sharp bones. Its eyes were dark and hollow, and they were fixed on me. And then it spoke. Its voice was the same soft, breathy whisper I had heard on the summit, but now it was right in front of me, close enough to send a chill down my spine. Caleb. It spoke my name with a strange, almost mournful inflection. I finally found my voice, a choked gasp of terror. What are you?" The figure didn't answer. It just continued to stare at me with those empty eyes, its gaunt form looming in the twilight. Then it raised a hand, its fingers long and spindly. It took another step closer, and I could see something glinting in its hand, something sharp. That was all it took. The paralysis broke, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. I turned and ran. Stumbling and scrambling down the trail, the image of that terrifying figure burned into my mind. I didn't look back. I just ran as fast as my legs could carry me, the whisper echoing in my ears, the feeling of its gaze burning into my back. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I had to get away. I had to get out of these woods, away from whatever was hunting me. And I had a terrible feeling that it wouldn't stop until it caught me. I ran blindly through the darkening woods, my lungs burning, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. Branches whipped at my face, and unseen roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't dare slow down. The image of that gaunt figure, its hollow eyes fixed on me, propelled me forward. The whisper echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder of the unnatural thing that was pursuing me. I could hear the sound of my own ragged breathing, the pounding of my boots on the uneven ground, but I couldn't hear anything else. No sounds of pursuit, no snapping twigs or rustling leaves that would indicate the figure was still behind me. But the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, remained as strong as ever. The forest was almost completely dark now, the last vestiges of twilight fading into a deep, inky blackness. I stumbled frequently, my hands outstretched to try and find my way. I had no idea if I was still on the trail or if I had veered off into the dense undergrowth. All I knew was that I had to keep moving, had to put as much distance as possible between myself and that terrifying entity. Panic clawed at the edges of my mind. What was that thing? It didn't look human, not entirely. The pale skin, the elongated limbs, the hollow eyes, it was like something out of a nightmare. And the way it had known my name, it sent a shiver of icy dread down my spine. I tried to think logically, to come up with some rational explanation for what I had seen. But my mind kept returning to the same conclusion. It wasn't natural. It was something else, something ancient and malevolent that had no place in the familiar world. Just when I thought I couldn't run any further, I saw a faint glimmer of light through the trees ahead. Hope surged through me. It had to be the trailhead, my car's safety. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my legs and the stitch in my side. The light grew brighter as I stumbled closer, and soon I could make out the familiar shape of my car, parked in the small clearing. I burst out of the trees and into the parking lot, gasping for breath. The familiar sight of my beat up Subaru Outback was a welcome relief. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. Finally, I managed to unlock the door and practically fell into the driver's seat. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my eyes darting nervously around the parking lot. It was empty, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon filtering through the trees. I didn't see anything, but the feeling of being watched still lingered. I fumbled with the ignition, my heart pounding with anxiety. The engine finally turned over, and I let out a shaky breath of relief. I threw the car into reverse and backed out of the parking spot, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. As I pulled out onto the dirt road, I glanced back at the woods. The darkness seemed to press in, concealing whatever horrors lurked within. I shuddered and pressed down on the accelerator, wanting to put as much distance as possible between myself and Mount Arvin. I didn't stop driving until I was well out of the Upper Peninsula, the familiar landscape of the lower part of Michigan a welcome sight. Even then, I kept looking in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see those hollow eyes staring back at me. I finally made it home in the early hours of the morning, exhausted and terrified. I stumbled into my apartment, locked the door behind me, and collapsed onto my bed, still fully clothed. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that gaunt figure, heard that chilling whisper. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had encountered something truly evil in those woods. I tried to tell a few friends what had happened, but they just looked at me with concern, suggesting I had probably just been tired or spooked by being alone in the wilderness. I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard. And I knew I would never look at the woods the same way again. Weeks turned into months, and the memory of that terrifying hike slowly began to fade, pushed to the back of my mind by the demands of everyday life. I still went hiking occasionally, but I avoided remote trails and always made sure to go with a group. The solitude of the wilderness no longer held the same appeal. Then, one evening, I was sitting at home watching television when I heard it. It was faint, almost imperceptible at first, like the whisper of the wind outside my window. But then it came again, a little clearer this time. My name. It was the same soft, breathy whisper I had heard on the summit of Mount Arvin, the same chilling tone that had haunted my nightmares for months. My blood ran cold. I froze, my senses on high alert. I looked around my apartment, my heart pounding in my chest. I was alone. The windows were closed. There was no wind. Caleb. The whisper came again, this time closer, more distinct. It sounded like it was coming from just outside my bedroom door. I sat there, paralyzed by fear, listening as the soft whisper repeated my name over and over again. Caleb, Caleb. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare breathe. I just sat there in the darkness, listening to that terrifying whisper, knowing that whatever I had encountered on Mount Arvin hadn't stayed in the woods. It had followed me home, and I had a chilling feeling that it would never stop calling my name. I still live in the same apartment. Sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I hear it. A faint whisper on the edge of hearing, just barely audible above the silence. Caleb. I try to ignore it. I tell myself it's just my imagination, the lingering effects of a traumatic experience. But deep down, I know the truth. It's still out there. It's still calling my name. And one day, I'm afraid it will finally come for me. So, if you ever find yourself hiking alone in the woods, especially in a place as remote as Mount Arvin, be careful. Enjoy the view, appreciate the silence. But if you ever hear a whisper calling your name, don't answer. Just run. Run as fast as you can and don't ever look back. Because sometimes the wilderness holds things that are best left undisturbed. And sometimes they decide to follow you home. My name is Harper. I've always been the pragmatic one in our group, the voice of reason that usually gets drowned out by the collective enthusiasm of my friends. This time, however, my skepticism was about to be put to the ultimate test. That's me, Liam, Maya, and Noah had decided to spend a long weekend camping on South Manitou Island, a place known for its stunning natural beauty, and according to local lore, its rather unsettling history. South Manitou Island sits nestled in Lake Michigan, a jewel of wilderness accessible only by ferry. The journey itself was picturesque, the mainland receding into a hazy blue line as we approached the island's rugged shoreline. Towering dunes met dense forests, and the air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. It was exactly the kind of escape we all desperately needed from the suffocating routine of city life. Liam, ever the adventurous one, had been the driving force behind this trip. He'd stumbled upon some articles online detailing the island's history, its former life as a farming and logging community, the tragic shipwrecks that littered its surrounding waters, and, of course, the ghost stories. He'd regaled us with tales of spectral figures wandering the abandoned buildings, whispers carried on the wind, and strange lights flickering in the darkness. Maya, our resident thrill seeker, had eaten it all up, her eyes wide with anticipation. Noah, usually laid back and easygoing, seemed a little more hesitant, but the promise of breathtaking hiking trails and secluded beaches had eventually won him over. As for me, I'd rolled my eyes at the ghost stories. Haunted islands were the stuff of campfire tales, meant to spook gullible kids. We were 4 adults with a healthy dose of common sense. What could possibly scare us? We arrived at the island's ranger station, a quaint, rustic building where we checked in and received our permits. The ranger, a woman with kind eyes and a weathered face, gave us a few warnings about the island, the unpredictable weather, the importance of staying on marked trails, and the need to be respectful of the fragile ecosystem. She mentioned the island's history briefly, but didn't dwell on the supernatural. Perhaps the locals had learned to dismiss the rumors, or maybe they just didn't want to scare off the tourists. We hiked a few miles to our designated campsite, a secluded spot nestled amongst a grove of ancient cedar trees. Setting up camp was a familiar ritual. I am struggling with the tent poles, Maya expertly organizing our food supplies, Noah meticulously laying out our sleeping bags, and me double-checking that we had everything we needed. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a sense of peace settled over us. The only sounds were the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant call of a loon. That first night was uneventful. We cooked dinner over a crackling campfire, sharing stories and jokes. Liam, of course, couldn't resist recounting some of the more chilling ghost stories he'd read, complete with dramatic voice acting and exaggerated sound effects. Maya shivered with delight, while Noah chuckled nervously. I just smiled and shook my head, attributing any strange sounds to the wind or local wildlife. We eventually retreated to our tents, the darkness of the forest enveloping us. Liam and Noah shared one tent, while Maya and I shared the other. I drifted off to sleep relatively easily, lulled by the quiet rhythm of the night. It was sometime in the early hours of the morning when I first heard it. A faint, rhythmic thudding sound, like someone walking through the woods. I initially dismissed it as an animal, perhaps a deer or a raccoon foraging for food. But as the sound grew closer, it became heavier, more deliberate. These weren't the light, scampering steps of a small creature. These were heavy footsteps, the kind a large person would make. I nudged Maya, who was sleeping soundly beside me. I whispered, "Did you hear that?" She groaned and rolled over. "Hear what?" "Go back to sleep." I listened intently. The footsteps were still there, just outside our tent. They seemed to be circling us, a slow, measured pace. There was something unsettling about the sound, something that sent a shiver down my spine despite my attempts to rationalize it. "Maya, I'm serious," I said, a little more urgently. "There's something outside." She finally stirred, groggily rubbing her eyes. "What is it?" "A bear." "I don't think so," I replied. "It sounds heavier. And the way it's walking, it doesn't sound like an animal." We held our breath, listening. The footsteps continued their slow, steady circuit around our tents. They were undeniably heavy, each step sounding like it was made by something with significant weight. But it wasn't just the weight that was strange. It was the rhythm. It was too consistent, too even. It didn't have the natural variation you'd expect from an animal moving through the undergrowth. Then, the footsteps stopped, right outside our tent. We could hear the rustling of leaves, the snapping of a twig. It felt like whatever was out there was standing just inches away from us, listening. My heart started to pound in my chest. Even I, the staunch skeptic, couldn't deny the growing sense of unease that was creeping over me. This didn't feel normal. This didn't sound like anything I'd ever heard in the woods before. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps started again, moving away from our tent, towards Liam and Noah's. We heard a muffled gasp from their tent, followed by hushed whispers. Whatever was out there had definitely woken them up too. The footsteps continued their slow, deliberate path, circling our campsite. They would stop for a while, then start again, always just outside the perimeter of our tents. It felt like we were being watched, observed by something unseen in the darkness. Maya squeezed my hand tightly. Her eyes were wide with fear. Even she, the thrill seeker, was clearly spooked. "What do you think it is?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I shook my head. I don't know. But it doesn't feel right. We lay there, huddled together in our sleeping bags, listening to the unsettling sounds outside. The heavy footsteps, the rustling leaves, the occasional snap of a twig. It was a symphony of the unknown, playing out in the darkness of the remote island. The ghost stories Liam had told around the campfire suddenly didn't seem so far-fetched anymore. A seed of doubt, a tiny crack in my wall of skepticism had been planted. And as the night wore on, that seed began to sprout, fueled by the chilling reality of what we were hearing just outside our tents. This camping trip, which had started with so much promise, was quickly turning into something far more sinister than any of us could have imagined. The footsteps continued their unsettling patrol for what felt like hours. Sleep was out of the question. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. The shared fear in our tent was palpable. Maya's grip on my hand tightened whenever the footsteps paused near us, and I could feel her trembling slightly. Eventually, as the first hint of dawn began to paint the eastern sky a pale gray, the footsteps finally faded away. The silence that followed was almost as unnerving as the sounds themselves. It was a heavy, oppressive silence, as if the very air was holding its breath. We waited for what seemed like an eternity before cautiously unzipping our tent. Liam and Noah were already outside, their faces pale and etched with exhaustion. They looked as shaken as we felt. "Did you hear that?" Liam whispered, his voice hoarse. "Hear it?" Maya replied, her voice barely above a whisper. What practically had a front row seat to whatever that was. Noah just nodded, his eyes wide and darting around the surrounding woods. He looked like he hadn't slept a wink. We huddled together, surveying our campsite. Everything looked normal. Our tents were intact. Our gear was undisturbed. There were no obvious signs of what had been circling us in the dark. No large tracks in the dirt, no broken branches. It was as if the heavy footsteps had belonged to something that didn't leave a trace. "What do you think it was?" Liam asked, his voice filled with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. I shook my head. "I have no idea, but it didn't sound like any animal I've ever heard." "Me neither," Maya agreed. It was too deliberate, too heavy. In those pauses, it felt like it was watching us. Noah, who was usually the most rational of the group, spoke up hesitantly. Maybe it was just someone else camping nearby. Someone with heavy boots. We all looked at each other. It was a plausible explanation, but it didn't quite fit. The sound hadn't been like boots on the ground. It had been more like heavy, bare feet making soft thuds on the forest floor. And the way it had circled us, stopping and starting, it felt too intentional to be just another camper. "There aren't supposed to be any other campsites this far out," Liam said, consulting the map the ranger had given us. "This is supposed to be a pretty isolated area." A chill ran down my spine. He was right. We had chosen this particular spot specifically for its seclusion. We decided to make some coffee and a quick breakfast, hoping that the daylight and the warmth of the fire would help to dispel the lingering unease. As we sat around the crackling flames, sipping our lukewarm coffee, we tried to come up with a logical explanation for what we had heard. Maybe it was a large animal we weren't familiar with, a bear walking on its hind legs, but even that didn't quite feel right. "Remember those stories the ranger mentioned?" Maya said, her voice low, "about the island being haunted." Liam scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Come on, Maya. You don't actually believe in that stuff, do you?" "I didn't," she admitted. "But after last night, I don't know what to think." Noah remained silent, staring into the flames with a troubled expression. I could tell he was just as unnerved as the rest of us, even if he wasn't ready to admit it. As for me, my skepticism was hanging by a thread. I still wanted to believe there was a rational explanation, But the memory of those heavy, relentless footsteps circling our tents in the darkness was hard to shake. We spent the rest of the morning trying to act normal. We packed up our sleeping bags, tidied up our campsite, and even went for a short hike along one of the nearby trails. The island was beautiful in the daylight, the sun dappling through the leaves, the air filled with the songs of birds. But the sense of unease lingered, a shadow lurking just beneath the surface of our forced cheerfulness. By midday, we had reached the old lighthouse on the northern end of the island. The views from the top were breathtaking, a panoramic vista of the lake stretching out to the horizon. We took some pictures, trying to capture the beauty of the place, but even the stunning scenery couldn't completely erase the memory of the previous night. As we started our hike back to our campsite, the weather began to change. The sky, which had been a clear blue just an hour ago, was now filled with dark, ominous clouds. The wind picked up, whipping through the trees and carrying the scent of rain. "Looks like we're in for a storm," Liam said, quickening his pace. We hurried back to our campsite, just managing to reach it before the first fat drops of rain began to fall. We huddled under our tents, listening to the rain drumming on the fabric above us. The storm raged for several hours, a relentless downpour accompanied by flashes of lightning and booming thunder. Just as suddenly as it had started, the storm passed. The rain stopped, the clouds began to break apart, and the sun peeked through, casting a golden light on the rain-soaked forest. The air was fresh and clean, and the woods seemed to sparkle with renewed life. We emerged from our tents, stretching our stiff limbs and taking in the aftermath of the storm. As we were gathering our things, Liam suddenly stopped, his eyes fixed on something in the mud near the edge of our campsite. "Guys, look at this," he said, his voice low and serious. We gathered around him, peering at the muddy ground. There, clearly visible in the soft earth, were tracks. Large tracks unlike anything any of us had ever seen before. They were roughly circular, with 3 distinct toe-like impressions, and they were huge, easily twice the size of a human footprint. A wave of fear washed over me. These weren't animal tracks. They weren't human tracks. They were something else entirely, something that had been right outside our tents last night. What are they?" Maya stammered, her face pale. Liam crouched down, examining the tracks closely. "I don't know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. But whatever made these, it was definitely heavy. Noah, who had been quiet until now, spoke up, his voice trembling slightly. Those are the footsteps we heard, aren't they?" We all knew he was right. The size, the shape, it all matched the heavy, deliberate footsteps that had circled our tents in the darkness. The rational explanations we had tried to cling to vanished in that moment. This wasn't an animal. This wasn't another camper. This was something else, something unknown, something that had left its mark on the muddy ground outside our tents, a chilling reminder of its presence. The remaining daylight seemed to drain away, replaced by a growing sense of dread. The beauty of the island suddenly felt menacing, the towering trees like silent witnesses to something sinister. We were no longer just campers enjoying a weekend getaway. We were intruders in a place that was perhaps not meant for us. And whatever had been watching us in the night was still out there. Somewhere in the dense woods, its heavy, 3 toed feet leaving their mark on the island's haunted soil. The stories we had dismissed as folklore now felt terrifyingly real, and we were trapped on this remote island, with no way to leave until the ferry came back in 2 days. 2 very long, very dark days and nights. And the thought of facing another night with those footsteps outside our tents filled me with a primal fear I had never experienced before. We had made a bad decision coming here. A very bad decision indeed. The discovery of the tracks sent a wave of panic through our group. The uneasy feeling that had been simmering beneath the surface all day finally boiled over into outright fear. We stared at the muddy prints, each one a tangible piece of evidence that something truly strange and potentially dangerous had been lurking around our campsite. "We need to get out of here," Maya said, her voice trembling. Now, Liam, though visibly shaken, tried to maintain a semblance of calm. "The ferry doesn't come back until Monday," he reminded her. "We're stuck here until then." "Stuck here?" Maya exclaimed. "Are you serious? We can't spend another night here with whatever that is." Noah, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke, his voice low and urgent. "Maybe we should pack up and hike back to the ranger station. It's a few miles, but it's better than staying here." It was a tempting idea, but the thought of hiking through the darkening woods, potentially encountering whatever had made those tracks, was terrifying. The ranger station was also likely locked up for the night. We'd be exposed and vulnerable. I don't know, I said hesitantly. The ranger station might not even be open. And hiking in the dark, what if we run into it on the trail? We stood there for a moment, the silence broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor. The thought of another night alone in the woods with the unknown creature was almost unbearable. What if we build a bigger fire? Liam suggested. Maybe it will keep it away. It was a long shot, but it was the only plan we had. We gathered all the dry wood we could find and built a massive bonfire in the center of our campsite. The flames leaped high into the air, casting flickering light on the surrounding trees and offering a small measure of comfort. As darkness fell, we huddled around the fire, our nerves on edge. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves sounded like approaching footsteps. We took turns keeping watch, our eyes scanning the perimeter of the firelight. The first few hours of the night passed without incident. The fire crackled merrily, and the darkness beyond its glow remained silent. We started to feel a sliver of hope, a fragile belief that maybe whatever had been out there last night had moved on. But then, just as we were starting to relax, we heard it again. The heavy footsteps. They started far off in the woods, a faint rhythmic thudding that sent a fresh wave of fear through us. They were coming closer. We all froze, our eyes wide with terror. The footsteps grew louder, heavier, more deliberate. They were definitely heading towards our campsite. Liam grabbed a large stick from the fire, holding it like a weapon. Noah did the same. Maya and I huddled together, our hearts pounding in our chests. The footsteps stopped just at the edge of the firelight. We could see nothing but the dark shapes of the trees beyond the flickering flames. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the crackling of the fire and our ragged breathing. Then we heard a sound we hadn't heard the night before. A low, guttural growl. It was a deep, animalistic sound, but it had an unnatural quality to it. Something twisted and wrong. It seemed to come from just beyond the edge of the light. We held our breath, our eyes straining to pierce the darkness. The growling continued, closer now, as if whatever was out there was circling us just beyond the reach of the firelight. Suddenly, a pair of eyes appeared in the darkness. They were large and glowing, reflecting the light of the fire like two burning coals. They were positioned high off the ground, much higher than any animal we knew of. A collective gasp escaped our lips. We stared in horror at the glowing eyes, frozen in place by fear. The growling intensified, and we could hear the rustling of branches as whatever it was moved closer. Then it stepped into the firelight. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form gaunt and shadowy. It moved with a strange, jerky gait, its long, spindly limbs ending in the three, toed feet that had left those massive tracks in the mud. Its head was vaguely humanoid, but elongated and grotesque, with those glowing eyes and a mouth filled with rows of sharp, pointed teeth. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. It was something else entirely, something out of a nightmare. A blood-curdling scream tore from Maya's throat. Liam and Noah yelled in terror, brandishing their burning sticks. I could only stare in horrified disbelief, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. The creature let out a deafening roar, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very air around us. It lunged forward, its long arms reaching towards us. Chaos erupted. Liam and Noah charged at the creature with their burning sticks, trying to keep it at bay. Maya and I scrambled backwards, trying to get away from its reach. The creature was surprisingly agile. It swatted away Liam's stick with a powerful swipe, sending sparks flying. Noah managed to jab it in the side, and the creature recoiled with a hiss, but it didn't seem to be seriously injured. It turned its attention to Maya, who had stumbled and fallen near the edge of the firelight. It reached down with one of its long, clawed hands. "Maya!" I screamed, lunging forward. I grabbed a heavy rock from the ground and hurled it at the creature's head. It struck with a sickening thud, and the creature staggered back, its glowing eyes momentarily losing their focus. That was all the opening we needed. Liam grabbed Maya's hand, and Noah and I followed close behind as we scrambled away from the fire, plunging into the darkness of the woods. We ran blindly through the trees, the sounds of the creature's enraged roars echoing behind us. Branches whipped at our faces, and we stumbled over roots and rocks, but we didn't dare to stop. We just kept running, our lungs burning, our hearts pounding with terror. We ran until we couldn't run anymore, collapsing in a heap on the forest floor, gasping for breath. We had no idea where we were or how far we had come. All we knew was that we had to get away from that thing. We huddled together, listening intently for any sign of the creature. The woods were silent now except for the sound of our own ragged breathing. Had we lost it? Or was it still out there, hunting us in the dark? We didn't dare to light a fire. We didn't dare to speak above a whisper. We just sat there, huddled together in the darkness, waiting for the first light of dawn. The night passed slowly, each minute feeling like an eternity. Every sound made us jump. Every shadow seemed to hide a monster. We were exhausted, terrified, and completely lost. When the first rays of sunlight finally filtered through the trees, we cautiously stood up. We were scratched, bruised, and covered in dirt, but we were alive. We had no idea how to get back to the ferry landing, but we knew we couldn't stay here. We started walking, hoping to find a trail or some sign of civilization. After what felt like hours, we finally stumbled upon a familiar path. It was the trail that led back to the ranger station. Relief washed over us, but it was quickly replaced by a renewed sense of urgency. We had to get off this island. We practically ran the rest of the way to the ranger station, arriving just as the ferry was pulling into the dock. We didn't even stop to talk to the ranger. We just ran onto the ferry, collapsing onto the nearest seats, our bodies shaking with exhaustion and fear. As the ferry pulled away from the island, we looked back at the receding shoreline. South Manitou Island, once a place of beauty and escape, now held a terrifying memory. We had gone there seeking adventure, but we had found something far more sinister. We had heard the stories, but we hadn't believed them. Now we knew the truth. Some places are haunted for a reason, and some bad decisions can have truly horrifying consequences. We made it off the island, but I know none of us will ever forget what we encountered in those dark woods. And I know for sure I will never go camping again without triple checking the local legends. Some stories, it turns out, are more than just stories. They're warnings. Warnings we should have heeded. They call me Mason. I've always been an outdoorsman, ever since I was a kid growing up in Michigan. There's just something about being out in the wilderness, the crisp air, the smell of pine, the quiet solitude that you can't find anywhere else. And of all the things I enjoy doing in the great outdoors, deer hunting in the Upper Peninsula has always held a special place in my heart. There's a rugged beauty to the UP, a sense of untamed wilderness that makes every hunting trip feel like a true adventure. This particular year, I had my sights set on bagging a real trophy buck. I'd heard whispers around town about a massive deer that had been spotted in the northern part of the peninsula, a buck with antlers so wide they looked like they could span a small car. Of course, those kinds of stories tend to get exaggerated, but something about the way people talked about this one felt different. There was a hint of awe, maybe even a touch of fear, in their voices. That was enough to pique my interest. I packed my gear, checked my rifle, and made the long drive north. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the landscape in vibrant shades of red, orange, and gold. The air was cool and carried the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. It was perfect hunting weather. I spent the first few days tracking smaller deer, getting a feel for the terrain and the movement of the animals. I saw a few decent bucks, but nothing that matched the legend I was chasing. I started venturing further into the woods, following faint trails and game signs that led deeper into the dense forest. On the fourth day, I finally found what I was looking for. I spotted a set of tracks in the soft mud near a creek bed, tracks bigger than any I had ever seen. The hoofprints were deep and wide, indicating a truly massive animal. My heart started to pound in my chest. This had to be him. I followed the tracks for hours, the anticipation building with every step. The trail led me through thick patches of underbrush, over fallen logs, and across rocky terrain. The woods grew denser, the sunlight filtering through the canopy in thin scattered beams. I was so focused on the tracks that I didn't pay much attention to how far I was going. The buck was smart, leading me on a winding path that seemed to have no end. Just when I thought I had lost him, I would find another set of tracks, a broken twig, or a patch of disturbed leaves that kept me going. The adrenaline was pumping, and I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in years. As the afternoon wore on, the shadows started to lengthen. The air grew cooler, and the sounds of the forest seemed to deepen. I glanced at my watch and realized it was later than I thought. Dusk was fast approaching. I should have turned back then. Any sensible person would have. I was deep in unfamiliar territory and the sun was about to set, but I was so close I could feel it. The tracks were fresher, the signs more recent. I told myself I would just go a little further, just to see what was over the next ridge. The woods grew darker, the trees looming like shadowy figures in the fading light. The familiar sounds of birds chirping and squirrels rustling in the leaves started to fade, replaced by a deeper, more unsettling silence. It was the kind of silence that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. I finally reached the top of a small rise, hoping to get a better view of the surrounding area. But all I saw was more trees, stretching as far as the eye could see. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the last vestiges of daylight were quick disappearing. That's when it hit me. I was lost. A wave of panic washed over me. I had gone too far, deeper into the woods than I had ever been before. I had no idea which way was back. The forest was starting to feel menacing, the shadows playing tricks on my eyes. Every rustle of leaves sounded like something approaching. Every snap of a twig made me jump. I tried to retrace my steps, but everything looked the same in the dim light. The trees all seemed identical. The trails I thought I had followed were nowhere to be found. I pulled out my compass, but I couldn't get a clear reading under the thick canopy. My phone had no signal. I was completely alone and utterly lost. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and a cold wind started to whisper through the trees. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me. I knew I needed to find shelter soon, or I was in for a long and miserable night. Just as I was about to start looking for a suitable place to hunker down, I heard it. It started as a faint rustling in the leaves, off to my left. At first, I thought it was just a small animal, maybe a raccoon or an opossum foraging for food. But then it grew louder, closer, and the sound, it wasn't right. It wasn't the quick, scampering sound of a small animal. This was different. This was heavier, slower, more deliberate. It sounded like something large dragging itself through the underbrush. The leaves crunched and snapped under its weight, and there was a distinct scraping sound, like claws or something else, being pulled across the forest floor. My blood ran cold. This wasn't an animal, not any animal I had ever heard before. I froze, my hand instinctively reaching for the rifle slung over my shoulder. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the direction of the sound. It was getting closer, moving slowly but steadily through the darkness. The rustling stopped for a moment, and I held my breath, listening intently. Then I heard it again, closer this time. And with it another sound, a low, guttural moan that sent a shiver down my spine. It was a sound of pain, or perhaps hunger. Whatever it was big and it was coming my way. My heart was pounding in my chest and my palms were sweating. I gripped my rifle tightly, my knuckles turning white. I scanned the darkness, my eyes trying to penetrate the gloom, searching for any sign of what was making that horrifying sound. The rustling started again, even closer now. I could hear the branches snapping, the leaves being pushed aside. Whatever it was just beyond the tree line, maybe only a few yards away. I raised my rifle, my finger hovering over the trigger. I didn't know what I was facing, but I knew I had to be ready to defend myself. The rustling stopped again right in front of me. I could hear heavy breathing, ragged and uneven. And then, through the darkness, I saw it. Two glowing eyes burning like embers in the night. They were low to the ground, but wide and intense, fixed directly on me. I couldn't make out the shape of the creature in the darkness, but those eyes, they were enough to fill me with a terror I had never known before. They weren't the eyes of a deer or a bear or any other animal I was familiar with. There was something ancient and malevolent in their gaze. A low growl rumbled from the darkness, a sound that vibrated through the air and into my very bones. And then the rustling started again, closer than ever. Whatever it was about to step out of the shadows. Those eyes, they were the color of hot coals, burning with an eerie intensity that seemed to pierce through the darkness and straight into my soul. They were set low to the ground, suggesting a creature that either walked on all fours or was unnervingly short and hunched over. The darkness obscured the rest of its form, but the sheer malevolence radiating from those glowing orbs was enough to tell me that whatever I was facing was not of this world. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a bear with some kind of strange eye condition? A wolf with an unusual glow? But the feeling I had, the primal fear that gripped me, told me it was something far more sinister. This was the stuff of nightmares, the kind of creature that lurks in the shadows of folklore and campfire tales. The low growl that had emanated from the darkness intensified, morphing into a guttural snarl that echoed through the silent woods. It was a sound that spoke of hunger, of predatory intent, and it sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through my veins. I tightened my grip on my rifle, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I knew I had to do something, but my mind was reeling with fear and confusion. Should I shoot? Should I try to run? I had no idea what this thing was capable of. The rustling started again, closer than ever. I could hear the creature shifting its weight, the sound of its feet, or whatever it had for feet, scraping against the fallen leaves. It was preparing to move, to come out of the shadows. Panic started to set in. I knew I couldn't just stand there and wait for it to attack. I had to act. But what could I do? I was lost, alone, and facing something that seemed to defy explanation. In a moment of sheer desperation, I made a bad decision. Instead of standing my ground or slowly backing away, I decided to try and scare it. I figured if it was some kind of animal, a loud noise might startle it and make it run away. I raised my rifle and let out a loud yell, a primal scream that I hoped would convey my fear and my willingness to fight. "Hey, get out of here!" I shouted, my voice cracking with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. The glowing eyes blinked once, slowly as if in amusement. The growling stopped for a moment, replaced by an unsettling silence. For a split second, I thought maybe it had worked, maybe I'd scared it off. But then, the silence was broken by a sound that chilled me to the very core. It was a low, raspy chuckle, a sound that seemed to come from the very depths of the forest. It was a sound that was filled with malice, with an ancient, knowing evil that made my blood run cold. That's when I knew I had made a mistake. This wasn't an ordinary animal. It wasn't scared. If anything, my outburst seemed to have amused it, perhaps even angered it. The rustling started again, more aggressively this time. The creature was moving, and it was coming closer. I could hear its heavy breathing, the snapping of twigs under its weight. And then, finally, it stepped out of the shadows. The darkness was still thick, but the faint moonlight filtering through the trees was enough for me to make out its general shape. It was humanoid but twisted and grotesque. It was tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, with long, spindly limbs that seemed disproportionate to its torso. Its skin looked pale and stretched taut over sharp bones, and its back was hunched over, giving it a stooped, almost predatory posture. Its head was large and elongated, with a narrow face and a wide, gaping mouth filled with rows of sharp, jagged teeth. Its glowing eyes were even more terrifying up close, burning with an unholy light. It wasn't wearing any clothes, and its body looked gaunt and emaciated, yet there was a strange sense of power and menace about it. It moved with a fluid, unnatural grace, its long limbs gliding through the underbrush as if it were floating. I stared at it in horror, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of hallucination, a trick of the light and my fear-addled mind. But the creature was definitely real. I could smell it now, a foul, sickly sweet odor that made my stomach churn. And I could see the hunger in its glowing eyes as it fixed its gaze on me. It took another step closer, and I instinctively raised my rifle, pointing it at the creature's chest. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the weapon steady. "Stay back," I stammered, my voice trembling. "I have a gun." The creature tilted its head to the side, its glowing eyes studying me with a strange curiosity. It let out another low chuckle, the sound sending shivers down my spine. It didn't seem to understand my words, or perhaps it simply didn't care. It took another step closer, and I knew I had to act. I couldn't just stand there and let it come for me. I squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the silent woods, the loud crack of the rifle momentarily breaking the oppressive tension. The creature flinched, its glowing eyes widening slightly. I saw a dark-stained bloom on its pale chest. For a fleeting moment, I felt a surge of hope. Maybe I had heard it. Maybe I had scared it off this time. But my hope was short-lived. The creature didn't fall. It didn't even cry out in pain. It simply looked down at the wound on its chest, its head tilted to the side as if it were examining an interesting curiosity. Then it looked back at me, its glowing eyes filled with something that looked like annoyance. It took another step, and then another, closing the distance between us. The bullet seemed to have done nothing to stop it. Panic seized me. My rifle was useless. This thing was impervious to bullets. What else could I do? I racked the bolt, chambering another round, my hands moving on pure instinct. I fired again and again, the shots echoing through the forest. Each time the creature flinched, and dark stains appeared on its body, but it kept coming. It moved with an unnatural speed now, its long limbs carrying it towards me in a swift, gliding motion. I kept firing, emptying my magazine, but it was no use. The bullets seemed to pass right through it, or perhaps they were just causing superficial wounds that didn't even slow it down. As the creature closed in, I dropped my now empty rifle. It was useless. I had no other weapons. I was completely defenseless. The creature reached out a long, spindly hand, its pale fingers tipped with sharp, black claws. I recoiled in horror, trying to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The trees were all around me, and the creature was blocking my path. Its cold, dead eyes stared into mine, and I saw a flicker of something in their depths, something that looked like hunger. Its mouth opened wider, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. A low, guttural growl rumbled in its chest, and I could smell its foul breath, a mix of decay and something else, something indescribably rank. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. I could feel its cold fingers brush against my arm, and then, suddenly, there was a loud crashing sound in the underbrush behind the creature. It was a heavy, clumsy sound, like something large and heavy stumbling through the woods. The creature froze, its grip on my arm tightening slightly. It turned its head, its glowing eyes focusing on the source of the noise. Whatever it was big. I could hear branches snapping and leaves crunching under its weight. It sounded like a bear, maybe even a moose. The creature hesitated for a moment, its attention divided. Then, with a low hiss, it released my arm and turned its full attention towards the sound in the woods. It took a step towards the noise, its long, spindly body moving with surprising agility. It disappeared into the darkness, the rustling of its passage quickly fading into the distance. I stood there, frozen in place, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I had been face to face with a nightmare, and then something else had come along and distracted it. I didn't know what had made that noise in the woods, but whatever it was, it had saved me. For now, at least. But I knew I couldn't stay here. Whatever that creature was, it might come back, and I didn't want to be around when it did. I turned and ran, stumbling through the darkness, not knowing where I was going, but knowing I had to get away from this place. The image of those glowing eyes and that grotesque face was burned into my mind, and the sound of its chilling chuckle echoed in my ears. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached, pushing myself through the dense underbrush, desperate to put as much distance as possible between myself and that thing. I didn't dare to look back. I just kept running, praying that whatever had distracted the creature would keep it occupied long enough for me to escape. But deep down, I had a feeling that this wasn't over. I had a feeling that I would see those glowing eyes again. And next time, I might not be so lucky. I ran blindly through the darkness, branches whipping at my face and unseen obstacles tripping my feet. My breath came in ragged gasps, and a stitch tore at my side, but I didn't dare to stop. The image of that gaunt, pale creature with its glowing eyes and razor-sharp teeth was seared into my mind, fueling my desperate flight. The forest seemed to press in on me, the trees like silent, watchful sentinels. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through me. I kept expecting to hear the heavy rustling of the creature behind me, to feel its cold, clawed hand on my shoulder. I had no idea where I was going. I had completely lost all sense of direction in my panic. All I knew was that I had to get away, as far away as possible from that horrifying thing. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled into a small clearing. The moonlight was slightly brighter here, allowing me to see my surroundings a little better. I was still deep in the woods, but at least the underbrush wasn't as thick. I leaned against a large oak tree, trying to catch my breath. My body was screaming in protest, every muscle aching, but the adrenaline was still pumping, keeping me going. I strained my ears, listening for any sound of pursuit. The forest was eerily silent, save for the gentle whisper of the wind through the leaves. I didn't hear anything. Had I managed to escape? A sliver of hope flickered within me, but it was quickly extinguished by the chilling memory of those glowing eyes. That creature hadn't seemed easily deterred. It had shrugged off multiple rifle shots. What were the chances that a simple distraction would be enough to make it give up? I decided I couldn't stay in the clearing. It was too exposed. I needed to find some kind of shelter, somewhere I could hide until morning. Maybe then, with daylight, I would have a better chance of finding my way back to civilization. I started walking again, moving slowly and cautiously, trying to make as little noise as possible. I kept my eyes peeled, scanning the darkness for any sign of the creature. After a while, I came across a small cave nestled in the side of a rocky hill. It wasn't much, just a shallow opening in the stone, but it looked like it might offer some protection from the elements, and hopefully from whatever was hunting me. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if it was a good idea to go inside. What if the creature was already in there? But the thought of spending the rest of the night exposed in the open forest was even more terrifying. I took a deep breath and cautiously approached the cave entrance. I peered inside, trying to see into the darkness. It was too dark to see anything clearly, but I didn't hear any sounds. I decided to risk it. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The air inside the cave was cool and damp, and it smelled of earth and stone. It was small, barely big enough for me to lie down in. I huddled in the back of the cave, trying to make myself as small as possible. I closed my eyes, willing myself to relax, but my mind was racing. Every shadow seemed to take on the shape of the creature. Every sound made me jump. I must have drifted off to sleep eventually, exhaustion finally overcoming my fear, but my sleep was fitful and filled with nightmares of glowing eyes and sharp teeth. I woke up with a start, the first rays of dawn filtering into the cave entrance. I sat up, my body stiff and sore. The cave looked less menacing in the daylight, just a small, natural hollow in the rock. I cautiously made my way to the entrance and peered outside. The forest looked different in the daylight, less menacing, but still unfamiliar. I didn't see any sign of the creature. I decided it was time to leave the cave and try to find my way back. I had to head east. I remembered vaguely from the setting sun the previous evening. I had no compass and no phone signal, but I figured if I kept the rising sun to my left, I should eventually hit a road or a trail. I started walking, moving as quickly as I could through the underbrush. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds chirping and squirrels chattering, a stark contrast to the terrifying silence of the night before. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every now and then, I would catch a glimpse of movement in the trees, but when I looked closer, there was nothing there. My nerves were still on edge, and I knew I wouldn't feel safe until I was out of these woods. Hours passed, and I walked until my legs felt like lead. I was hungry and thirsty, but I kept pushing myself forward. Just when I was starting to lose hope, I heard a sound in the distance. It was the faint sound of an engine, the unmistakable drone of a vehicle. My heart leaped with joy. Civilization! I started running towards the sound, pushing through the thick undergrowth, ignoring the scratches and scrapes. The sound grew louder, and then, through the trees, I saw it, a dirt road. And parked on the side of the road was a pickup truck. I burst out of the woods and onto the road, waving my arms frantically. The driver of the truck, an older man with a grizzled beard, looked surprised to see me emerge from the forest. He slowed down and rolled down his window. "You all right there, son?" he asked, his eyes scanning my disheveled appearance. I got lost. I stammered, my voice hoarse. "I was hunting and I went too far. Can you help me?" The man nodded. "Hop in. I'll give you a ride back to town." I gratefully climbed into the truck, sinking into the worn seat with a sigh of relief. I was safe. I was finally safe. As the man drove me back towards town, I told him a watered-down version of my story, omitting the part about the glowing-eyed creature. I just said I had gotten lost and spent a terrifying night in the woods. He listened patiently, offering words of comfort and a bottle of water. When we reached town, he dropped me off at my truck. I thanked him profusely and watched as he drove away. I sat in my truck for a long time, just staring out the windshield, trying to process everything that had happened. I was alive, but I knew I would never look at the woods the same way again. That night, back in my cabin, I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing eyes staring back at me. I kept hearing that low, guttural chuckle in my ears. I knew I had to tell someone what I had seen, but who would believe me? It sounded like something out of a horror movie, not real life. A few days later, I went back to the area where I had gotten lost, taking a few friends with me. We searched for any sign of the creature, but we found nothing. No tracks, no strange remains, nothing. It was as if the whole thing had been a bad dream, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that there are things out there in the wilderness, things that defy explanation, things that should be left undisturbed. I still go hunting in the UP, but I never venture as deep into the woods as I used to. I stick to the well-worn trails, and I always make sure to be back before nightfall. And every time I hear a rustling in the leaves or see a pair of eyes reflecting in the beam of my flashlight, a shiver runs down my spine, and I remember that terrifying night when I came face to face with something truly evil in the dark woods. They call me Mason, and I know what's out there, and so do you now. Be careful when you go into the woods. You never know what might be watching you from the shadows. My name is Lily, and for as long as I can remember, summers have meant Torch Lake. It's a tradition, a sacred ritual in my family. My parents, my younger brother, and I would pack up the car, leaving behind the humid city for the crisp, clean air of northern Michigan. Our cottage, a charmingly rustic A-frame with peeling blue paint, sat nestled amongst towering pines, just a stone's throw from the lake's sandy shore. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours, a place where memories were made. Fireflies were caught in mason jars, and the only sounds at night were the gentle lapping of waves and the hooting of owls. This particular summer felt different, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. I was 17, teetering on the edge of adulthood, a strange mix of wanting independence and still craving the comfort of my family. Maybe it was that in-between stage, that feeling of being neither fully a child nor quite an adult, that colored my perception of things. Or maybe, just maybe, there was something genuinely unsettling brewing beneath the surface of our idyllic summer retreat. The day had been perfect, the kind of day that postcards are made of. The sun blazed in a cloudless sky, the water of Torch Lake shimmered with an almost unnatural turquoise hue, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and sunscreen. We spent the afternoon swimming, laughing, and attempting, with limited success, to water ski behind my dad's ancient motorboat. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple, a comfortable exhaustion settled over us. After a dinner of grilled burgers and corn on the cob, my brother Ethan retreated inside to play video games, his usual evening ritual. My parents, content with their books and the fading light, settled onto the porch swing, their quiet murmurs a familiar and comforting sound. I, however, felt restless. The day's energy still hummed beneath my skin, and the lure of the lake, now bathed in the soft glow of twilight, was too strong to resist. I'm going for a walk. I called out to my parents, grabbing a light sweater. "Be careful, honey," my mom replied, her voice soft. "Don't go too far." "I won't," I promised, already slipping out the screen door. The air was cooler now, carrying the earthy scent of damp sand and pine needles. The beach, usually bustling with families and laughter during the day, was deserted. The only footprints were the fading impressions of earlier beachgoers, slowly being erased by the gentle breeze. I walked barefoot, the cool sand a welcome contrast to the warmth of the day. As I strolled along the shoreline, I noticed something peculiar about the lake. Torch Lake is known for its incredible clarity, often compared to the Caribbean. Even at night, with the help of the moon, you can usually see a few feet down into the water. But tonight, the surface was different. It was unusually still, almost unnervingly so. There were no ripples, no gentle waves lapping at the shore. The water looked like a vast black mirror, reflecting the starlit sky with an unsettling perfection. It felt heavy, dense, almost viscous. A sense of unease began to prickle at the back of my neck. It wasn't a rational fear, just a vague feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just the late hour and my overactive imagination. But the stillness of the water continued to bother me. It felt unnatural, like the lake was holding its breath. I walked further down the beach, the silence broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves in the trees behind me. The moon, a sliver of silver in the inky sky, cast long, distorted shadows that danced and swayed with the gentle breeze. I kept my eyes on the water, its dark surface both mesmerizing and slightly frightening. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a reflection of a distant cloud, or a particularly pale patch of sand. But as I drew closer, my heart began to pound in my chest. Standing at the very edge of the water, where the blackness of the lake met the pale sand of the beach, was a figure. It was tall and slender, its form indistinct in the dim light, but undeniably human-shaped. What struck me most was its color, or rather, the lack thereof. It was pale, almost translucent, like a figure sculpted from moonlight. It stood perfectly still, facing out into the darkness of the lake, its back to me. A cold wave of fear washed over me, so intense it made my breath catch in my throat. Who would be standing out here alone at this hour? And why were they so pale? I hesitated, unsure of what to do. Should I call out? Should I turn and run? My mind raced, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe it was just someone taking a late night swim, though the stillness of the water argued against that. Maybe it was a neighbor, though I didn't recognize the figure's silhouette. I took a tentative step closer, my bare feet sinking slightly into the damp sand. The figure remained motionless, its gaze fixed on the dark expanse of the lake. The silence was heavy, broken only by the frantic thumping of my own heart. Suddenly, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. One moment it was there, a pale silhouette against the black water, and the next it was gone. There was no splash, no sound of movement, no indication of where it had gone. It simply ceased to exist. I stood there for a long moment, my eyes wide, my mind struggling to comprehend what I had just seen. Had I imagined it? Was it just a trick of the light in my tired eyes? But the image was so vivid, so clear. I knew what I had seen. A primal fear gripped me, the kind that sends shivers down your spine and makes the hairs on your arms stand on end. I didn't wait to think, didn't try to rationalize. I turned and ran, my bare feet pounding against the sand, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't stop running until I reached the porch of our cottage, the familiar yellow light spilling from the windows a welcome beacon in the darkness. I stumbled through the screen door, my heart still racing, my body trembling. My parents looked up, their expressions a mixture of concern and surprise. "Lily? What's wrong?" My dad asked, his voice sharp. I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. I could only shake my head, my eyes darting towards the dark expanse of the lake visible through the trees. "You look like you've seen a ghost," my mom said, her brow furrowed with worry. And in that moment I knew she was right. And somehow I had a feeling that this was just the beginning. The stillness of Torch Lake that night held a secret that had just shown its pale face, and I had a terrifying premonition that it wouldn't be the last time I saw it. The summer, which had started with such promise, had suddenly taken a dark and unsettling turn. The familiar comfort of Torch Lake had been replaced by a creeping dread, a feeling that something was lurking just beneath the surface, both of the water and of our peaceful existence. My parents, bless their hearts, tried their best to soothe my frayed nerves. My dad, ever the pragmatist, suggested it was probably just a shadow playing tricks on my eyes, or maybe someone waiting in the shallows that I hadn't seen clearly. My mom, more empathetic but equally skeptical, offered me a cup of chamomile tea and gently reminded me that I had been tired and the darkness can make you see things. I wanted to believe them. I really did. The thought of what I might have actually witnessed was far more terrifying than the idea of my own mind playing tricks on me. But the image of that pale figure, standing so still and silent at the edge of the black water, was burned into my memory with unnerving clarity. The way it had simply vanished, without a sound or a ripple, haunted my waking thoughts and invaded my dreams. That night, sleep was a distant luxury. I lay in bed. The familiar sounds of the cottage, the gentle creaking of the wooden frame, the rhythmic chirping of crickets outside, amplified in the silence. Every shadow in my room seemed to take on the shape of the figure I had seen. Every rustle of leaves outside my window sounded like footsteps approaching. I kept my bedside lamp on, its weak glow doing little to dispel the oppressive darkness that seemed to have settled over the lake, and, by extension, over our little cottage. The next day, I felt edgy and exhausted. I tried to act normal, joining my family for breakfast and attempting to engage in conversation. But my mind kept drifting back to the previous night. Every time I glanced out the window towards the lake, I felt a shiver of unease. The water, under the bright morning sun, looked deceptively calm and inviting, its turquoise surface sparkling as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. But I knew better. I had seen the darkness that lay beneath that shimmering facade. I spent the morning avoiding the lake, sticking close to the cottage and trying to distract myself with a book. But the words blurred on the page. My focus constantly pulled back to the unsettling image of the pale figure. Ethan, oblivious as usual, was happily building a sandcastle on the beach, his cheerful shouts echoing through the trees. My parents sat on the porch, reading and occasionally exchanging quiet words. Everything seemed normal, but I felt like I was living in a different reality, one where a silent, pale figure could appear and disappear without a trace. In the afternoon, my curiosity, coupled with a desperate need for reassurance, finally got the better of me. I decided to take another walk down to the beach, this time in broad daylight. The sun was high in the sky, casting harsh shadows that were easily identifiable and therefore less menacing. The beach was dotted with families, their laughter and splashing a stark contrast to the eerie silence of the previous night. I walked to the spot where I had seen the figure standing. The sand was smooth and undisturbed, showing no signs of anyone having been there. I scanned the water's edge, looking for any footprints or anything that might explain what I had seen. There was nothing. It was as if the figure had never existed. I waded into the shallows, the cool water a welcome relief from the heat. I looked down at the sandy bottom, searching for any unusual marks or disturbances. The sand was soft and fine, with the occasional small shell or pebble. Nothing out of the ordinary. A wave of doubt washed over me. Maybe my parents were right. Maybe it had just been a trick of the light, my imagination running wild in the darkness. But the memory felt so real, so tangible. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen something truly strange. That evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lawn, I found myself drawn back to the lake. I sat on the porch swing, watching the water as the sky transformed into a canvas of fiery hues. The stillness of the previous night was gone, replaced by a gentle lapping of waves against the shore. But even with the return of the familiar sounds and the beauty of the sunset, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Later, after dinner, as my parents and Ethan settled in for a movie, I decided to do some research. I grabbed my laptop and went to my room, closing the door behind me. I typed "strange sightings Torch Lake" into the search bar, half expecting to find nothing. To my surprise, the search yielded several results. There were forum discussions about unusual lights seen over the lake, old newspaper articles about unexplained disappearances decades ago, and even a few Reddit threads with titles like "Creepy Things I've Seen at Torch Lake." I clicked on one of the Reddit threads, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. It was on a subreddit dedicated to unexplained phenomena in Michigan. The original poster recounted a story about seeing a pale, humanoid figure standing at the edge of the lake late at night, an experience eerily similar to my own. Several commenters chimed in with their own unsettling encounters at Torch Lake, mentioning strange lights, unexplained sounds, and a persistent feeling of being watched. One comment, in particular, sent a shiver down my spine. The user with the handle Northern Nightmares wrote about a local legend, a story passed down through generations of families who had lived around the lake. The legend spoke of a malevolent entity, a spirit or creature that dwelled in the deepest parts of the lake and occasionally emerged at night, drawn to the shore by some unknown force. The description of the entity was vague, but the recurring theme was its pale appearance and its silent, watchful nature. I closed my laptop, my hands trembling. Could it be true? Could there be something more to Torch Lake than just its natural beauty? Was the pale figure I had seen connected to this local legend? The thought was both terrifying and strangely compelling. I wanted to dismiss it as folklore, as old wives' tales meant to scare children. But the sheer number of similar accounts I had found online, coupled with my own unsettling experience, made it hard to ignore. That night, the stillness returned to the lake. It was even more profound than the night before, an almost suffocating silence that seemed to swallow all other sounds. I lay in bed, listening to the silence, my senses on high alert. Every creak of the cottage, every rustle of leaves outside made me jump. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a faint sound. It was a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, carried on the still night air. It seemed to come from outside, from the direction of the lake. I held my breath, straining to hear. There it was again, a low, indistinct murmur, like someone speaking just below the threshold of hearing. I couldn't make out any words, but the tone was undeniably unsettling, filled with a sense of sorrow and something else, something darker. Fear gripped me, cold and paralyzing. I pulled the covers up to my chin, my eyes wide with terror. The whispering continued, faint but persistent, seeming to drift closer to the cottage. Suddenly, the whispering stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the sound itself. I lay there frozen, waiting for something to happen. After what felt like an eternity, I heard a faint scratching sound coming from just outside my window. It was a soft, rhythmic scraping, like fingernails dragging across the wooden frame. My heart pounded in my chest, threatening to burst. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing I could disappear, wishing I could rewind time and never go for that walk on the beach. The scratching continued for a few agonizing moments, then abruptly stopped. The silence returned, heavy and oppressive. I lay there, trembling, until the first rays of dawn peeked through my window, casting long, pale shadows across my room. As the sun rose higher, painting the lake in hues of gold and pink, the oppressive atmosphere seemed to lift slightly. But the fear lingered, a cold knot in the pit of my stomach. I knew that what I had seen on the beach was not just a figment of my imagination. And the whispers in the dark, they were a chilling confirmation that something was very wrong at Torch Lake. The peaceful summer vacation had turned into something far more sinister, and I had a growing feeling that I was in the middle of something I didn't understand, something that was slowly beginning to reach out from the darkness. The morning after the whispers and scratching, I felt like a ghost myself. My eyes were bloodshot and ringed with dark circles, and my body ached with tension. I didn't dare tell my parents what had happened. I knew they would dismiss it as a nightmare fueled by my late night internet research. Ethan, as usual, was oblivious, already clamoring for pancakes. I forced a smile and tried to act normal, but the fear was a constant companion, a cold weight in my chest. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat. Every sound made me jump. I avoided looking at the lake, the sparkling water now a source of profound dread. Later that morning, my mom suggested we go into town for groceries. I eagerly agreed, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the cottage and the looming presence of the lake. Even the mundane task of pushing a shopping cart through the crowded aisles of the local supermarket felt like a relief. But even miles away from Torch Lake, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that pale figure standing silently at the end of an aisle. The feeling was irrational, I knew, but it persisted. We returned to the cottage in the late afternoon. As we unpacked the groceries, I noticed something odd. One of the screen doors, the one leading from the living room to the porch, was slightly ajar. I distinctly remembered latching it tightly before we left. A sudden chill ran down my spine. Had someone been inside, I cautiously pushed the door open and stepped onto the porch. Everything seemed normal. The porch swing swayed gently in the breeze, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the wooden planks. But the feeling of unease lingered, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. That evening, my parents decided to have a bonfire on the beach. The idea filled me with dread, but I didn't want to raise suspicion by refusing to go. As darkness fell and the flames crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows on the sand, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The lake just beyond the firelight remained a dark and silent presence. As we sat around the fire, roasting marshmallows and telling stories, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. I kept glancing towards the edge of the darkness, my eyes straining to see beyond the flickering flames. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of fear through me. Around 10 o'clock, Ethan started to get sleepy, so my mom took him inside to bed. My dad and I stayed by the fire, the silence broken only by the crackling flames and the gentle lapping of the waves. The moon, now a half circle in the sky, cast an eerie glow over the lake. "You've been quiet tonight, Lily," my dad said, breaking the silence. "Everything okay?" I hesitated, unsure of what to say. I wanted to tell him everything about the pale figure, the whispers, the scratching, but I was afraid he would think I was crazy. "Yeah, Dad, I'm just a little tired," I mumbled, avoiding his gaze. He nodded, but I could see the concern in his eyes. We sat in silence for a few more minutes, the fire slowly dying down. "I think I'm going to head in too," I said finally, standing up. "I'm really tired." "Okay, honey, good night," he replied, poking at the embers with a stick. I walked back to the cottage, my heart pounding with a sense of impending doom. As I reached the porch, I glanced towards the lake. The moonlight shimmered on the dark water, creating an almost hypnotic effect. And then I saw it again. Standing at the edge of the water, in the exact same spot as before, was the pale figure. It was even clearer in the moonlight this time. I could see its slender form, its long dark hair hanging down its back, and the unnerving stillness of its posture. It was facing the lake, its gaze fixed on the dark expanse. This time, I didn't run. A strange sense of morbid curiosity, mixed with a terrifying resignation, kept me rooted to the spot. I watched the figure, my breath caught in my throat. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the figure began to move. It didn't walk or swim. It simply glided across the surface of the water, as if it were walking on solid ground. It moved silently, effortlessly, towards the deeper part of the lake. As it moved further away from the shore, the moonlight illuminated its face. It was gaunt and pale, with hollow eyes that seemed to absorb the light. And then I saw its mouth move. It wasn't speaking, but its lips were forming a shape, a silent word that sent a jolt of pure terror through me. It was my name, Lily. The figure continued to glide across the water, its gaze still fixed on the darkness ahead. It moved further and further away until it was just a pale speck in the distance. And then it vanished completely, swallowed by the blackness of the lake. I stood there on the porch, my legs trembling, my mind reeling. I had seen it again, and this time it had called my name. What did it want? What was it? I stumbled inside, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to tell my parents. They had to believe me now. I found them in the living room, my mom reading a book and my dad dozing on the couch.
Mom, Dad!
I cried, my voice trembling. I saw it again, the figure. It was at the lake and it said my name. My parents looked at me, their expressions a mixture of sleepiness and concern. Lily, honey, what are you talking about? My mom asked gently. The pale figure. I saw it again. It was standing at the edge of the lake, and then it walked on the water, and it called my name. I repeated, my voice rising in panic. My dad sat up, his brow furrowed. Lily, are you sure you weren't dreaming? No, Dad! I was wide awake! I saw it with my own eyes! It was real, I insisted, tears welling up in my eyes. My parents exchanged worried glances. They clearly didn't believe me. Lily, maybe you're just stressed, my mom said softly. This has been a long day. Why don't you go back to bed? But Mom, you don't understand. There's something wrong with this lake. Something evil, I pleaded, my voice cracking. They tried to calm me down, assuring me that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But I knew what I had seen. I knew that the pale figure was real, and I knew that it wanted something from me. I went back to my room, but there was no way I could sleep. I sat by the window, staring out at the dark expanse of the lake. The moon had disappeared behind a cloud, and the water looked even more menacing in the darkness. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound coming from outside. It was the whispering again, soft and low. But this time it sounded closer, much closer. I pressed my ear against the window pane, straining to hear. The whispering grew louder, more distinct. I still couldn't make out any words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was calling me. Lily, Lily. The whispering seemed to be coming from right outside my window. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding with terror. Then I heard the scratching again, this time right on the glass of my window. I screamed, jumping back from the window. The scratching continued, growing more frantic. I could almost feel the presence of whatever was outside, its pale face pressed against the glass, its hollow eyes staring into my soul. I ran to my door and threw it open, stumbling out into the hallway.
Mom! Dad!
It's here! It's outside my window! I screamed. My parents rushed out of their bedroom, their faces etched with concern. What is it? Lily? My dad asked, his voice filled with alarm. The figure! It's outside! It's scratching at my window! I cried, pointing towards my room. My parents followed me back to my room and peered out the window. The scratching had stopped. There was nothing there. Lily, there's nothing outside, my mom said gently. But it was just there! I swear, I insisted, my voice trembling. My dad went outside to check, but he found nothing. They both tried to reassure me that it was just a bad dream, that I was letting my imagination run away with me. But I knew the truth. I knew that the pale figure was real, and it was getting closer. It had called my name. It had come to my window. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my parents' room, too terrified to go back to my own bed. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside, sent shivers down my spine. As dawn approached, casting a pale light over the lake, I knew we had to leave. I couldn't stay here any longer. Whatever was in that lake, whatever that pale figure was, it was coming for me. Mom, Dad, we have to go, I said, my voice firm. We have to leave Torch Lake. Now, my parents looked at me, their faces tired and worried. Lily, we just got here, my dad said. We were planning on staying for another week. I don't care! We have to go! There's something wrong here. I'm scared. I pleaded, tears streaming down my face. They looked at each other, and I could see the dawning of understanding in their eyes. They had seen my fear, my genuine terror. They knew that something had deeply disturbed me. Okay, honey, my mom said softly. We'll pack up and leave this morning. A wave of relief washed over me. I had convinced them. We were leaving. As we packed the car, I glanced one last time at the lake. The morning sun sparkled on its surface, making it look deceptively beautiful and innocent. but I knew the darkness that lurked beneath. As we drove away from the cottage, I looked back one last time. In the rearview mirror, I could just make out the familiar blue A frame nestled amongst the trees. And for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a pale figure standing on the porch, watching us go. I didn't say anything. I just turned forward, my heart still pounding, the chilling whisper of my name echoing in my mind. I knew that even though we were leaving Torch Lake, a part of it, a terrifying pale part, would always stay with me. And I had a terrible feeling that one day it would call my name again. My name is Samuel Kendrick, but most people call me Sam. I'm what you might call an Dorsey. Type, though I wouldn't go so far as to say I'm a survivalist. I just like the quiet. The real quiet, the kind you can't find anywhere near a city, or even a small town. The kind of quiet where the loudest thing you hear is the wind whispering through the pines, or the distant call of a loon. That's why I headed up to the Hiawatha National Forest. I'd been planning this trip for months, pored over maps, checked weather reports, packed and repacked my gear until I knew exactly where everything was, even in the dark. I wasn't planning on doing anything crazy, no scaling sheer cliffs or hunting wild boar. Just a simple, solo camping trip, a few days to disconnect from the constant noise of the world and reconnect with myself, I guess. Cheesy, I know, but it's true. I drove up on a Thursday late in the afternoon. The sky was that perfect, crisp autumn blue, the kind that makes you want to breathe deep and never exhale. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth, a scent that instantly calmed me. I found a secluded spot well off the main trails near a small, unnamed lake. It wasn't marked on any of the official maps, which was exactly what I wanted. Complete isolation. The first night was perfect. I set up my tent, a sturdy, two-person dome that I'd had for years. It was old, reliable, having seen me through countless storms and chilly nights. I built a small fire, cooked some beans and franks over the flames, and just sat there, listening to the crackle of the wood and the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. The stars were incredible, a million pinpricks of light against a velvet backdrop. I felt peaceful, truly, deeply peaceful. I slept like a log that night, the kind of dreamless, heavy sleep that only comes from fresh air and physical exertion. I woke up with the sunrise, feeling refreshed and invigorated. I made coffee on my little camp stove, ate a granola bar, and decided to go for a short hike to explore the area. That's when I found the first one. It was small, maybe 6 inches tall, and incredibly intricate. It was a figure, vaguely humanoid in shape, woven from thin, flexible twigs. But it wasn't just twigs. There were tiny bones woven into it as well, the delicate ribs and vertebrae of something. A small bird, maybe, or a mouse. I couldn't tell. The craftsmanship was disturbing. It was too precise, too deliberate to be the work of an animal. And it was too unsettling to be the work of a child. It was placed directly in front of my tent, propped up against a small rock as if it were watching me. I picked it up carefully, turning it over in my hands. The twigs were smooth, almost polished, and the bones were bleached white by the sun. It was strangely beautiful in a macabre sort of way. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine, but I told myself it was just the morning chill. Kids, I muttered to myself. Probably some kids camping nearby. But I knew that wasn't right. I hadn't seen or heard anyone else since I'd arrived. And this spot was remote. It wasn't the kind of place you'd stumble upon accidentally. It felt intentional. I put the figure down, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was just a weird little thing. Nothing to worry about. I continued my hike, trying to focus on the beauty of the forest, the sunlight filtering through the leaves, the calls of the birds. But I couldn't shake the image of that twig figure out of my head. It felt like a warning. Or maybe an offering. I returned to my campsite a couple of hours later, feeling a little better. The sun was higher in the sky, and the forest felt less ominous. I made lunch, cleaned my gear, and spent the afternoon reading a book by the lake. I tried to relax, to recapture that feeling of peace I'd had the night before, but it was elusive. A low-level anxiety hummed beneath the surface. As evening approached, I started to feel genuinely nervous. The shadows grew longer, and the forest seemed to close in around me. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves in a way that sounded almost like whispers. I kept glancing around, half expecting to see someone standing at the edge of the trees, watching me. But there was nothing. Just the trees, the lake, and the growing darkness. I built a larger fire that night, hoping the flames would provide some comfort. I ate quickly, huddled close to the warmth, my back to the darkness. I kept the fire going long after I finished eating, feeding it with branches and logs until it was roaring, casting flickering shadows that danced on the surrounding trees. I decided to go to bed early, hoping to escape the growing unease and sleep. I crawled into my tent, zipped it up tight, and lay there in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the forest. The crackling of the fire, the hooting of an owl, the rustling of the wind, and something else. A faint, rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap. It was coming from just outside my tent. I held my breath, straining to hear over the blood rushing in my ears. Tap, tap, tap. It was definitely there. Something was tapping on the side of my tent. I grabbed my flashlight, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I switched it on, pointing the beam at the side of the tent where I'd heard the noise. Nothing. Just the nylon fabric, rippling slightly in the breeze. I slowly unzipped the tent, my heart pounding in my chest. I poked my head out, shining the flashlight around the campsite. Nothing. Just the fire, dying down to embers and the dark, silent trees. I crawled back into my tent, feeling a mixture of relief and terror. I was being paranoid. It was just the wind, or maybe a branch falling against the tent. I lay there for a long time, unable to sleep. Every creak, every rustle, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through me. I finally drifted off into a fitful sleep, plagued by nightmares I couldn't quite remember when I woke up. The next morning, the sun was shining, but the air felt heavy, oppressive. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, bracing myself for what I might find. There, directly in front of my tent, were 3 more twig figures. They were identical to the first one, intricate and unsettling, woven from twigs and tiny bones. They were arranged in a row, facing my tent as if they were waiting for me. And this time, I knew without a doubt that I wasn't alone. My breath caught in my throat. 3 figures. 3 identical figures, staring blankly ahead with their empty, twig and bone faces. It wasn't kids, it wasn't some random prank. This was deliberate. And it was targeted at me. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the figures. They seemed to shimmer in the morning light, almost as if they were alive. I felt a primal fear, the kind that bypasses logic and goes straight to your gut. The kind of fear that tells you to run, to hide, to get as far away as possible. But where would I go? I was miles from anywhere, surrounded by a vast, indifferent forest. And whoever was doing this clearly knew where I was. I forced myself to take a deep breath. Panic wouldn't help. I needed to think. I needed to figure out what was going on. I examined the new figures more closely. They were, as I thought, identical to the first one. The same meticulous weaving, the same tiny, bleached bones. I noticed something new, though. A small, dark stain on the twigs of one of the figures. It looked like blood. My stomach churned. This was getting worse. Much worse. I spent the rest of the morning in a state of heightened alert. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the trees, listening for any sound that was out of place. The forest, which had seemed so peaceful just 2 days ago, now felt menacing, hostile. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of fear through me. I decided I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit here and wait for whatever was going to happen. I decided to try and find some sign of whoever was making these figures. Some clue, some track, anything that would explain what was going on. I started by circling my campsite, widening the radius with each pass. I looked for footprints, broken branches, anything that might indicate someone had been there, but the forest floor was covered in a thick layer of pine needles and leaves, making it difficult to see any tracks. I did find something, though. A small, almost imperceptible trail leading away from my campsite and into the deeper woods. It wasn't a well-worn path, more like a faint disturbance in the undergrowth. But it was definitely there. My heart started to race. This was it. This was a clue. I hesitated. Following this trail felt dangerous, like I was walking into a trap, but I couldn't just ignore it. I had to know. I grabbed my backpack, making sure I had my knife, my compass, and my first aid kit. I also took a small, sturdy branch from the firewood pile to use as a walking stick and maybe as a weapon, if necessary. I started down the trail, moving slowly and cautiously. The forest grew darker and denser as I went, the trees closing in around me, blocking out the sunlight. The air was thick and still, and the only sound was the crunch of my boots on the leaves. The trail twisted and turned, seemingly without rhyme or reason. It felt like I was walking in circles, but my compass assured me I was still heading in a generally consistent direction. After about an hour, the trail opened up into a small clearing, and in the center of the clearing, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a circle of stones arranged in a perfect ring, and in the center of the circle there was a structure. It was made of the same twigs and bones as the smaller figures, but it was much larger, almost life-sized. It was a crude representation of a human figure with long, spindly limbs and a gaping, hollow head, and it was covered in things: feathers, bits of fur, scraps of cloth, and more bones. Larger bones. Bones that looked disturbingly human. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This wasn't just creepy. This was evil. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn around and never look back. But I couldn't. I was frozen in place, my eyes fixed on the grotesque figure. Then I heard it. A sound, a soft chanting voice coming from somewhere behind me. I whirled around, my heart pounding in my chest. I raised my makeshift weapon, ready to defend myself. But there was nothing there. Just the trees swaying gently in the breeze. The chanting had stopped. I stood there for a long moment, listening, straining to hear anything over the pounding of my own blood. Nothing. I slowly lowered my branch, my hands shaking. I was losing it. I was hallucinating. The stress, the fear, it was getting to me. I turned back to the circle of stones, determined to get a closer look. I needed to see, I needed to understand. As I approached the figure, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. There was a small, flat stone in front of it, almost like an altar. And on the stone, there was something new. It was a photograph, a Polaroid. I picked it up, my fingers trembling. It was a picture of me. It was a picture of me, sleeping in my tent. It had been taken just last night through the thin nylon fabric. The blood drained from my face. I felt a cold, clammy sweat break out on my forehead. This wasn't just someone messing with me. This was someone who was watching me. Someone who was close. Someone who was hunting me. I dropped the photograph as if it were burning hot. I turned and ran. I ran as fast as I could, stumbling over roots and rocks, branches whipping at my face. I didn't care about the trail. I didn't care about getting lost. I just wanted to get away. Get away from that clearing, from that figure, from that presence. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath, my heart pounding like a drum. I had no idea where I was. I was completely lost. And I was still being watched. I could feel it, the eyes on me, the presence in the trees. I was trapped. I looked down to pick up the branch I dropped to use as a weapon, but only found another figure, the same as before, staring at me. The twig figure seemed to mock me, its hollow, bone-studded face a grotesque parody of a smile. I kicked at it, sending it scattering into the underbrush. The small release of anger did nothing to quell the rising tide of panic. I was lost, alone, and hunted. I forced myself to take a few deep breaths, trying to regain some semblance of control. Panicking wouldn't help. I needed to think. I needed to find my way back to my campsite, or at least to a main trail. I pulled out my compass, my hand still shaking. The needle spun wildly for a moment before settling on a direction. North. Okay. I knew, roughly, that my campsite was north of where I'd entered the woods. If I could just keep heading north, I might have a chance. I started walking, pushing my way through the dense undergrowth. The forest seemed to press in on me, the trees like skeletal fingers reaching out to grab me. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat. Every rustle of leaves sounded like the approach of my pursuer. I walked for what felt like hours, the sun slowly sinking below the horizon. The forest grew darker, the shadows deeper. I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. The fear was a constant, knowing presence in my gut. I stumbled, nearly falling. I caught myself on a tree, my hand brushing against something rough and sticky. I looked down. My hand was covered in blood. Not my blood. It was on the tree. A large, dark smear, still wet. I recoiled in horror, wiping my hand frantically on my pants. My mind raced. What had happened here? Was this where the bones came from? I didn't want to know. I didn't want to think about it. I just wanted to get out of here. I started walking faster, almost running. I didn't care about the noise I was making. I just wanted to escape. Then I heard it again. The chanting. The same soft, rhythmic voice I'd heard in the clearing, but this time it was closer. Much closer. It was coming from behind me. I turned around, my heart pounding in my chest. I strained to see through the gathering darkness, and then I saw it, a figure. Moving slowly through the trees, tall and gaunt, its form indistinct in the shadows. But I could see the glint of something in its hand, something long and sharp. An axe. I froze, paralyzed with terror. This was it. This was the end. The figure stepped closer, emerging from the shadows, and I saw its face. It wasn't a face, not a human face anyway. It was a mask made of bark. Rough, gnarled bark shaped into a grotesque caricature of a human face, with empty, hollow eyes and a wide, gaping mouth filled with sharp, pointed teeth made of bone. The figure raised the axe. I screamed. A raw, primal scream that tore through the silence of the forest. But the scream was cut short, not by the axe, by something else. Something grabbed me from behind. Something strong and cold. I felt a sharp pain in my back, and then nothing. I woke up slowly, my head throbbing, my body aching. I was lying on the ground, my face pressed against the cold, damp earth. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My arms and legs were bound tightly. I lifted my head, my vision blurry. I could see figures standing around me. Not the twig figures, these were different. They were people. Or they had been people. Their bodies were emaciated, their skin stretched tight over their bones. Their eyes were vacant, their expressions blank. And they were all wearing masks. Masks made of bark. They were chanting. The same soft, rhythmic chant I'd heard before. And in the center of the circle I saw it. The large twig and bone figure from the clearing. But it was different now. It was complete. It was covered in fresh blood. And in its chest, where a heart should be, was my backpack. I understood then. I finally understood. This wasn't a hunting ground. It was a recruiting ground. These people, these things, they weren't just killing people. They were transforming them, turning them into more of themselves. And I was next. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable. The chanting grew louder, closer. I felt a sharp, burning pain in my chest, and then silence. I opened my eyes. I was somewhere else. I was standing in the middle of a forest, but it was different. It was brighter. The trees were green and lush. The air was warm and sweet. I was home. I turned around looking for something, someone. And then I saw her, a woman, standing at the edge of the trees, smiling. She was beautiful. Her hair was long and flowing. Her eyes were bright and kind. She beckoned to me. I started to walk towards her, a feeling of peace washing over me. But then I saw something. Something in her hand, a small, intricately woven figure, made of twigs and bones. I stopped. My blood ran cold. I looked closer at her face, and I saw it. Beneath the beauty, beneath the smile, I saw the mask, the bark mask, the hollow eyes, the gaping mouth, the sharp bone teeth. I screamed. But this time, no sound came out. I was trapped. Forever. I was one of them now, a creature of the forest, a guardian of the secrets, a weaver of the figures, and my hunt would begin. And the figures, the warnings would be placed and found by someone just like me. They call me Nora. Not Eleanor, not Lenore, just Nora. Plain, simple, maybe a little boring, which ironically is the exact opposite of what I crave. I'm a sucker for the adrenaline rush, the shiver down the spine, the kind of fear that makes your heart feel like it's going to explode right out of your chest. My boyfriend Liam is more of the chill by the campfire and roast marshmallows type, but he loves me, and he tolerates my enthusiasms. He draws the line at haunted houses. Too predictable, he says, with a roll of his eyes, but he's always game for a good camping trip, especially if it involves a hike with a potentially spooky history. That's how we ended up in the Nordhaus Dunes wilderness area, a sprawling stretch of sand, forest, and Lake Michigan shoreline that's as beautiful as it is, allegedly unsettling. Liam had found some obscure forum online, filled with the usual mix of conspiracy theories and outright fabrications, but buried amongst the nonsense were a few genuinely creepy stories about the dunes. Whispers of strange disappearances, unsettling sounds at night, and a persistent feeling of being watched. Of course, I was hooked. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, the air crisp and carrying the scent of pine and lake water. The parking lot was surprisingly full for a late September weekend, filled with families and groups of friends, all seemingly oblivious to the darker tales I devoured online. Liam, ever the pragmatist, pointed out that the sheer number of people was a good sign. Safety in numbers, right? He said, giving me a reassuring squeeze. I nodded, trying to shake off the creeping sense of anticipation that had been building ever since we'd crossed the state line. We hoisted our backpacks, mine significantly lighter thanks to Liam's insistence on carrying most of the heavy gear, and set off down the trail. The Nordhaus Dunes are a different kind of landscape. It's not the towering, dramatic dunes of Sleeping Bear. Further south, these are more subtle, rolling hills of sand that gradually rise and fall, interspersed with pockets of dense forest. The trails are well maintained, but there's a wildness to the place a sense of untamed nature that's both exhilarating and slightly intimidating. We'd chosen a campsite a few miles in, nestled in a small clearing near the lake. Setting up was routine tent erected, sleeping bags unrolled, firewood gathered. Liam, bless his heart, even managed to build a respectable fire despite the slightly damp wood. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple, I suggested our sunset hike. There's this one dune, I explained, pulling up a slightly blurry map on my phone. It's supposed to be one of the highest points in the area. The view from the top should be incredible. Lamb, ever agreeable, finished his task of securing the food bag to avoid unwanted animal visitors and gave me the green light, grabbing his water bottle. I could see the slight hesitation in his eyes, though. He'd read some of the same forum posts I had. He knew the stories. The trail to the dune was less defined than the main path, a narrow, winding track that snaked its way through the increasingly dense forest. The air grew noticeably cooler as we climbed, the sounds of other campers fading behind us. The only sounds were our own breathing and the rustling of leaves under our boots. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something. A shadow, a pair of eyes, anything. The climb was steeper than I'd anticipated. My lungs burned and sweat trickled down my back despite the cool air. Liam, ever the athlete, seemed unfazed, his pace steady and strong. I, on the other hand, was starting to feel the effects of a long week at my desk job. Finally, we emerged from the trees onto the crest of the dune, and the view, it was breathtaking. The sun was a molten ball of fire, sinking into the vast expanse of Lake Michigan. The sky was ablaze with color, reflecting off the water in a shimmering display of light and shadow. The sand beneath our feet was soft and cool, still holding the warmth of the day. We stood there for a long moment, silent, just taking it all in. It was one of those perfect moments, the kind you want to bottle up and save forever. The kind of moment that makes you feel small and insignificant, yet simultaneously connected to something vast and ancient. Worth the climb, huh? Liam said, breaking the silence. I nodded, my voice caught in my throat. Absolutely. We sat down on the sand, leaning against each other, watching the last sliver of the sun disappear below the horizon. The colors faded, replaced by the deep blues and purples of twilight. Stars began to prick the darkening sky one by one. It was beautiful, peaceful, serene. And then we heard it. It started as a low rumble, almost imperceptible, like the sound of distant thunder. But there were no clouds in the sky, no sign of a storm. The sound grew steadily louder, resolving itself into a guttural growl, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath us. It wasn't the sound of any animal I'd ever heard. It was too deep, too primal. It resonated in my chest, a physical sensation as much as an auditory one. It felt ancient, hungry, and wrong. Liam stiffened beside me. What is that? He whispered, his voice barely audible above the growing growl. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was constricted with fear, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. The growl intensified, rising in pitch and volume, punctuated by a series of snarls and snorts that sent shivers down my spine. It was coming from the woods below us, from the darkness that had gathered at the base of the dune. The shadows seemed to deepen, to writhe and twist, as if something unseen was moving within them. My heart hammered against my ribs. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee, to get as far away from that sound as possible. Liam grabbed my hand, his grip tight and reassuring, but I could feel the tremor in his fingers. He was scared, too. We didn't speak. We didn't even look at each other. We just stood up, slowly, carefully, and started backing away from the edge of the dune, our eyes fixed on the darkness below. The growling continued, growing louder, closer. I could almost feel the hot breath of whatever it was on the back of my neck. Then, without a word, we turned and ran. We didn't look back. We didn't stop. We just ran, stumbling and tripping over roots and rocks, our lungs burning, our legs screaming in protest. The sound of the growling pursued us, echoing through the trees, seeming to gain on us with every step. I don't know how long we ran. It felt like an eternity. The forest was a blur of shadows and shapes, the trail barely visible in the fading light. My only focus was on putting as much distance as possible between us and that terrifying sound. Finally, we burst out of the trees and onto the main trail, the familiar sight of the well, worn path a welcome relief. We didn't stop running until we reached the parking lot, the site of our car, a beacon of safety in the gathering darkness. We scrambled inside, slamming the doors shut and locking them, our hearts pounding, our breaths ragged. Liam fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he could barely get them in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and we peeled out of the parking lot, tires spitting gravel, not slowing down until we were miles away, back on the main highway, heading away from the Nordhaus dunes, and the terrifying sound that had chased us through the darkness. We didn't speak for a long time. The silence in the car was thick with fear, punctuated only by the hum of the engine and our own ragged breathing. Finally, Liam broke the silence. What the hell was that?" he asked, his voice still shaking. I shook my head, unable to find the words to answer. I didn't know, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. All I knew was that we had heard something that shouldn't exist, something ancient and hungry, and we had barely escaped with our lives. The stories about the Nordhaus dunes, they weren't just stories. They were warnings, and we had ignored them. The drive back to civilization felt agonizingly slow. Every shadow that flickered in the headlights, every rustle of leaves along the roadside, sent jolts of adrenaline through me. Liam gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, his eyes constantly scanning the rearview mirror. We didn't speak, the unspoken question hanging heavy in the air. What was that? We finally reached a small town, the warm glow of streetlights and the comforting sight of 24-hour gas stations a welcome change from the oppressive darkness of the dunes. Liam pulled into the first well-lit parking lot he saw, a fast food restaurant buzzing with late-night activity. He put the car in park but didn't turn off the engine. "We need to talk about this," he said, his voice still strained, his gaze fixed on the dashboard. I nodded, my own throat tight. I reached for my water bottle, my hand trembling so badly I almost dropped it. The cool water helped, but it didn't wash away the lingering fear that coated my mouth like ash. It sounded animal. I managed to say, the word feeling inadequate and absurd, but bigger, deeper, like nothing I've ever heard before. Liam finished, his voice low. He finally looked at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "Nora, that wasn't a bear. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't anything normal." I knew he was right. My rational mind desperately wanted to find a logical explanation, a mountain lion, maybe, although they were rare in that area, or some kind of unusual sound distortion caused by the wind in the dunes. But my gut, the primal instinct that had sent us fleeing in terror, told me something different. The stories, I whispered, remembering the forum posts I'd devoured. The disappearances, the sounds. Liam shook his head. I thought they were just stories, campfire tales, exaggerations. So did I admit it. But now the stories felt chillingly real. The thought of those people, lost in the dunes, possibly encountering the same thing we had, sent a fresh wave of fear through me. We sat in silence for a long time, the sounds of the restaurant, the chatter of customers, the sizzle of the grill, the beeping of the cash registers, a jarring contrast to the silent terror we just experienced. We should tell someone, I said, finally breaking the uneasy quiet. The Rangers, maybe. Liam hesitated. Tell them what? That we heard a weird noise in the woods. They'll think we're crazy. He had a point. How could we describe that sound, that feeling of primal dread, to someone who hadn't experienced it? They'd probably dismiss us as hysterical campers, spooked by their own imaginations. But what if it happens again? I pressed. What if someone else gets hurt? Liam sighed, running a hand through his already disabled hair. I don't know, Nora. I don't know. The uncertainty was agonizing. We were caught between the desire to warn others and the fear of being ridiculed or dismissed. We eventually decided to drive back to my apartment, a 3-hour journey that felt like an eternity. We didn't listen to the radio, the silence filled only with our own anxious thoughts. Every time we passed a stretch of dark woods, I felt a knot of fear tighten in my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was still out there, lurking in the shadows. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the apartment, every rustle of leaves outside my window, sent me jumping out of my skin. Liam, usually a sound sleeper, tossed and turned beside me, muttering in his sleep. The next morning, we were both exhausted, our eyes dark-circled and our nerves frayed. We went through the motions of making coffee and toast, the mundane routine a stark contrast to the lingering terror that hung over us. Liam decided to call the Nordhaus Dunes Ranger Station, after all. He kept the conversation brief and vague, reporting that we'd heard unusual animal sounds, while hiking and expressing concern for the safety of other campers. The ranger on the other end of the line sounded polite but skeptical, assuring Liam that they would look into it, but reminding him that the area was home to a variety of wildlife. The call didn't offer much comfort. It felt like we were screaming into the void, our warning unheard, unheeded. The following days were a blur of anxiety and paranoia. I jumped at every unexpected noise, constantly scanning my surroundings, feeling like I was being hunted. I started researching the Nordhaus dunes obsessively, poring over old maps, historical records, and Native American folklore. I found scattered references to a creature, a being of immense power and malevolence, said to inhabit the dunes. The descriptions were vague and varied, ranging from a giant wolf-like beast to a shape-shifting spirit that preyed on lost travelers. The stories were dismissed as legends, myths, but they resonated with a chilling familiarity. One particular account from a local historian's blog caught my attention. It described a series of disappearances in the early 20th century, all occurring in the same area we'd been hiking. The victims were all experienced outdoorsmen, familiar with the dunes, yet they vanished without a trace. The local authorities at the time attributed the disappearances to wild animals or accidental falls, but the historian suggested something more sinister was at play. He mentioned a local legend, a Native American story about a dune walker, a creature that guarded the sacred places of the dunes and punished those who dared to trespass. The legend described the creature's growl as a sound that could shake the earth and freeze the blood. The description sent a chill down my spine. It was too close to what we'd heard, too specific to be a coincidence. I showed the blog post to Liam. He read it slowly, his face paling with each word. This is insane, he said, his voice barely a whisper. This is just folklore, right? But the doubt in his voice was clear. The rational explanations were crumbling, replaced by a growing sense of dread. A feeling that we had stumbled upon something ancient and dangerous, something that we were not meant to see or hear. The feeling of being watched intensified. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, fleeting shadows, dark shapes that disappeared when I turned to look. I felt a constant pressure in my chest, a sense of impending doom that I couldn't shake. One evening, as I was walking home from work, I heard it again. It was faint, distant, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The low, guttural growl, the sound that had haunted my nightmares for weeks. It was coming from the park across the street from my apartment building, a small, wooded area that I usually walk through without a second thought. I froze, my blood turning to ice. My heart hammered against my ribs. My breath caught in my throat. It couldn't be. It was miles away from the dunes. It was impossible. But I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that it was real. The creature, whatever it was, had followed us, and it was getting closer. The growl, faint as it was unmistakable. It echoed the terror of that night on the dunes, a sound that resonated deep within my bones, a primal fear trigger. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring at the park across the street. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows, making the trees seem to writhe and twist. My rational mind screamed that it was impossible, a hallucination, a product of stress and lack of sleep. But my instincts, honed by that terrifying encounter, knew better. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I dialed Liam's number, my heart pounding in my ears. Liam, I whispered, my voice trembling. It's here, the growl. I heard it. In the park. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his ragged breathing. Nora, he said finally, his voice low and strained. Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure?
Yes,
I said, my voice rising in panic. I'm sure. It's the same sound. It's getting closer. Stay where you are, he said, his voice firm. Don't move. I'm coming to get you. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my eyes fixed on the dark, shadowy depths of the park. The growl came again, slightly louder this time, closer. It was definitely coming from within the park. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Every rustle of leaves, every passing car, every distant siren sent jolts of fear through me. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like prey waiting to be pounced upon. Finally, I saw Liam's car pull up, the headlights cutting through the darkness. He jumped out, his face pale and drawn, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination.
Nora, get in the car, I shouted.
I didn't hesitate. I ran to the car, scrambled inside, and slammed the door shut. Liam peeled away from the curb, speeding away from the park. It followed us, I said, my voice shaking. It followed us, Liam. How is that possible? Liam didn't answer. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. We drove in silence for a long time, the city lights blurring around us. We ended up back at my apartment, the familiar surroundings offering a fragile sense of security. We locked the doors, checked the windows, and drew the curtains. We sat on the couch, huddled together, trying to make sense of what was happening. The rational explanations had long since crumbled. We were dealing with something beyond our understanding, something that defied logic and reason. The Dune Walker, I said, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. The legend, it's real. Liam nodded, his face grim. It seems so. We disturbed something Nora, something ancient and powerful, and now it's hunting us. The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through me. We were trapped, hunted by a creature we couldn't comprehend, a being from a realm beyond our own. We spent the night huddled together, unable to sleep, jumping at every sound. The growl didn't return, but the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was constant and oppressive. The next morning, we decided to take action. We couldn't just sit and wait for the creature to find us. We needed to understand what it wanted, why it was following us, and how to stop it. We returned to the research, poring over the old texts and legends, searching for any clue, any weakness, any way to appease the creature. We found one recurring theme in the story's respect. The Dune Walker, according to the legends, was a guardian of the dunes, a protector of its sacred places. It only attacked those who disrespected the land, who trespassed on its territory without offering proper reverence. Had we done something to disrespect the dunes, we'd hiked off the main trail, climbed to the top of the highest dune. Had that been seen as a transgression? We also found a reference to an offering, a way to appease the Dune Walker. The legend spoke of a ritual, a way to show respect and ask for forgiveness. It involved returning to the dunes, to the place where we'd first heard the growl, and leaving an offering of tobacco and a small piece of silver. It sounded absurd, ridiculous, like something out of a fantasy novel. But we were desperate. We had nothing to lose. Against our better judgment, against every rational instinct screaming at us to stay away, we decided to return to the Nordhaus Dunes. We drove back to the wilderness area, the familiar landscape now imbued with a sense of dread and menace. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy. We parked in the same lot, the memory of our panicked escape still fresh in our minds. We gathered the offering, a pouch of tobacco, and a small silver coin, and set off down the trail, our hearts pounding in our chests. The hike to the dune was agonizing. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent shivers down our spines. We kept expecting to hear the growl, to see the creature emerge from the shadows. Finally, we reached the base of the dune, the place where we'd first heard the terrifying sound. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows across the sand. We stood there, at the edge of the darkness, our offering clutched in our hands. Liam spoke, his voice trembling but resolute. "Well, we offer this in peace," he said, his voice echoing across the silent dunes. "We ask for forgiveness. We did not mean to disrespect this place. We were just awed by its beauty." He placed the tobacco and the silver coin on the sand at the base of a twisted, ancient-looking tree. We waited. The silence was deafening. The air was still. The only sound was our own breathing and the distant roar of the lake. Then we heard it. Not the growl, not the terrifying sound that had haunted our nightmares, but a sigh, a whisper of wind through the trees, a sound that seemed to carry both sorrow and acceptance. The feeling of being watched, the oppressive sense of dread began to lift. The air felt lighter, cleaner. We stood there for a long time, unsure of what to do, what to expect. Finally, Liam spoke. I think it's over," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. We slowly backed away from the dune, our eyes fixed on the spot where we'd left the offering. We didn't turn our backs until we were back on the main trail, back in the relative safety of the trees. We didn't speak on the way back to the car. We didn't speak on the drive home. The silence was different this time, not filled with fear, but with a sense of awe and wonder. We never heard the growl again. The feeling of being watched disappeared. The nightmares faded, but we never forgot. We never forgot the terror of that night on the dunes, the feeling of being hunted by something ancient and powerful. We never forgot the lesson we'd learned that there are places in this world that are best left undisturbed, places where the veil between our world and something other is thin. We never went back to the Nordhaus Dunes. But sometimes on a quiet night, when the wind is blowing just right, I think I can still hear the whisper of the Dune Walker, a reminder of the wild, untamed places that still exist and the creatures that guard them. And I am filled with a profound sense of respect and fear. The story is a warning, of course, but it has never fully stated what we did wrong. Perhaps our presence was all that was needed. Perhaps the dunes were never ours to touch.